And and then you have to, also I put in the traffic signal timings between, synchronization between interchanges and all that stuff. And it very accurately replicates a lot of things I've seen on these roads in terms of how the queues form. This is Terabella, just to show you how detailed this analysis goes. This is at Terabella and Shoreline, where because Shoreline is often backed up like this, these guys can't go until maybe the very last minute. And there's a flood of U-turners here because they're avoiding that 20-minute line to get off 101. So they make a left on Shoreline where there's no line, come down here, there's typically maybe a one-cycle line, which is maybe 2.5 minutes or so, and they just pull a U-turn here. And there's a lot of people doing this now. It's increased over the years. To the extent that, there's a development supposed to go in here at 1001, these people are going to have a hard time getting out, at least during rush hour. Because it's very difficult to make a right turn here because they have to yield to the U-turners, and once the U-turners are done, through traffic goes through, and then they still can't turn because it's blocked like this. So I haven't put in that additional traffic that'll come in, but I'm going to do that soon, as well as some of the other developments like 777. And also I guess the bus lane part of that is that Dutch intersection, so-called, where they're going to take out essentially they're going to not allow people to use the bike lane to make right turn lanes. And I actually did that by accident because when I first modeled this, that's what I put in. I just had 2 lanes with no dedicated right turn lane. And the backup from Shoreline went well past San Verone, almost to Moffett. And then I put in the dedicated right turn lane, like you saw there, and there was no backup at all. So I think, this could be a very useful tool. It's free, so, I hope the city, maybe the barrier before is the cost, because probably the commercial packages cost tens of thousands of dollars to lease every year. This is free. And as far as I can tell, it's very well done.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Janes. All right. Are there any other members of the public that would like to address the commission on an item that is not on the agenda this evening? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to our next item, which is the public hearing on the East Wistman Precise Plan. Is there a staff report?
Yes, there is. There we go. Thank you very much, Acting Chair Cox, Commission. This is the East Wistman Precise Plan. The purpose of this meeting is to get a recommendation from the Environmental Planning Commission on the proposed final East Wistman Precise Plan for council consideration next month. As I said, here's where we are in the process. Our public adoption hearings with the Environmental Planning Commission and City Council. We've been through quite a lot in this project, including community workshops, lots of study sessions, lots of public input, lots of commission and council input, and input from the BPAC and other groups. And so this is ideally the end of the line, getting to the council for final adoption. Here's tonight's agenda. It's changed slightly from the staff report. We're recommending that the commission consider a question on jobs housing linkage guidelines. And then the commission is free to comment on any of the other topics in the staff report, including development review process, master plan rights, character area targets, and so on. But there are staff recommendations for each of those, and so if the commission is okay with the staff recommendation, then maybe no comment is necessary. There are other minor changes, and we can talk a little bit about that. In addition, the commission is being asked to make a recommendation on a general plan amendment, a zoning map amendment, and a zoning text amendment. And then lastly, we'll also talk about the final EIR. So the first topic for the commission tonight is on the jobs housing linkage guidelines. Based on council direction, some of the procedural detail in the jobs housing linkage program was removed from the precise plan. And staff drafted some key points to be fleshed out in greater detail in the future, but some key points for the adoption of jobs housing linkage guidelines, which were included in the commission report. It includes the procedural detail. The draft precise plan required, if residential projects were going first, required office projects to be approved prior to the residential projects being constructed. This gives a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more time between the completion of a residential project and the start of an office project, so 5 years for office submittal. In addition, if the office project goes first, the draft precise plan required that the residential project be identified, but that a community benefits option be provided at the time of approval. The draft guidelines provide a little bit more flexibility, saying that those requirements would be determined through a phasing plan approved at the time of office approval. In addition, some of the comments that we got from the developer community were to improve certainty and possibly reduce some of the requirements, especially associated with the floor area transfer. That was incorporated. But in addition, staff felt it was important to reemphasize that there is no certainty with the development reserve. That is going to be always up to the council based on whether there's development reserve left, other issues of design review and council goals and community benefits. This program does maintain the overall goals of the draft precise plan, including requiring that residential go first and/or be certain. Maintaining the balance of jobs and housing, we're actually reducing the opportunity for double counting with some language, and of course protection of the development reserve and limits on overall office growth. In the last 2 days, the residential applications for the Los Altos School District TDR projects, Miramar and Summerhill, provided letters to the EPC. They stated that if, as previously directed by council, they are not allowed to take advantage of the benefits of the Jobs Housing Linkage Program, then that would give them the incentive to leave the Transfer of Development Rights Program. Of course, the balance here is that the office projects also submitted before the Jobs Housing Linkage Program was developed. These 5 projects, 3 office projects and 2 residential projects, are roughly in balance today, and the overall goal is to have them come through together and maintain the overall balance of the East Wisman Precise Plan. However, if we require that the office projects somehow support the residential projects, it could add uncertainty to these office projects that had already submitted applications. Summerhill's request is associated with fee waivers and or deductions. Miramar's request is to access some form of jobs housing linkage rights. Staff is seeking input and comments from the Environmental Planning Commission. We don't currently have a recommendation because this is a quickly evolving issue, but we will take your input and comments and forward them to the City Council in November. The City Council requested that they have the opportunity to review large base FAR projects. In addition, the EPC would also have this opportunity to review these large base FAR projects, but asked staff to study a potential threshold for what constitutes large. Staff is recommending a 70,000 square foot threshold. This is based on several factors. First off, there have been no recent developments between 20,000 and 70,000 feet outside of downtown, and that gap is, at 20,000 square feet, staff feels those projects would certainly be too small. 70,000 square feet, we have several good examples of recent projects for the EPC and the council to look at in terms of the size of those projects and if they would want to review future projects of those size. 70,000 square feet is about a 4-acre office project at 0.4 FAR. It's about a 1.6-acre residential project at 1.0. Those are the base FARs. About 30% of parcels covering about 65% of the land area in East Wisman are bigger than 4 acres. So you can imagine that this threshold would cover a little more than half of the project area in East Wisman, about a third of the parcels. The EPC was also given a list of other recent projects and can use that list of projects to identify a different threshold if they have input on that. Some areas, like this area shown in the map in purple, near Maud and Clyde, are required to get master plans prior to submitting a planned community permit. Applicants can also choose to do master plans based on jobs housing linkage, shared parking, or other special cases. The draft precise plan did not allow master plans to confer any rights to the development reserve. Staff is recommending that be revised slightly to allow a 2-year period wherein an approved master plan can be, wherein a planned community permit application can be submitted based on an approved master plan in order to maintain that rights to the development reserve approved through the master plan. If an applicant needs longer than this, we do have a development agreement process that can extend that timeline longer. Staff took another look at the character area targets. They are intended to guide future decision makers about growing with a balanced mix of office, residential, open space, and neighborhood commercial. The public comment has expressed concern that the targets were too low in the mixed-use character area for office and that there are too many 2-bedroom and larger units identified in the housing mix. Staff has updated these character area targets, the office, based on analysis that there is adequate developable parcels to accommodate up to 1.2 million square feet of office in the mixed-use character area. It's also consistent with the TDR bonus alternative and providing larger ranges to provide more flexibility for development to be consistent. The housing mix was updated to incorporate ranges and to consider a mix of condominium and apartment, likely condominium and apartment development types. Council also directed staff to study potential height exceptions near the Middlefield Station. Staff is recommending a 750-foot buffer from the station, shown in this map, within the high-intensity mixed-use area. In addition, it would not be allowed to go within 200 feet of the precise plan boundary. It's associated with an incentive for additional open space, height variation, and neighborhood commercial. You could only get these height exemptions if you provided all three. And it's also associated with limits on massing and requirements for separations between buildings of that height. Council directed staff to add a critical mass of commercial near the station, the Middlefield Station. So staff increased the minimum to 5,000 square feet. In addition, in order to help support a grocery store and other broad range of uses, staff is recommending an increase to the minimum depth for all neighborhood commercial. And also the height exception adds an additional incentive for additional neighborhood commercial near the station. Our economic analysis analyzed the potential for a grocery store. There will be enough demand for a new grocery store in the area. However, there will be challenges in terms of integrating it with potential project designs, and that's something that we're going to have to work out on a project-by-project basis. Staff is recommending an update to the office TDM requirements. Instead of the draft precise plan, which has the TDM requirements on a development-by-development basis. The previous was a near-term requirement of about 0.9 extending to a long-term requirement of about 0.7 trips per 1,000 square feet. Staff is recommending using an area-wide standard, and this allows the precise plan to maintain better consistency with the environmental impact report. It creates an incentive for legacy buildings, existing buildings that aren't currently covered by TDM programs, to join through partnerships with new buildings. It also allows staff and the city to respond to increases in trips generated by existing buildings. So we could actually reduce or increase the TDM requirement on new buildings based on what's happening in the background. And potentially, there could be fewer overall trips with the revised standard if there are fewer larger developments built. Alternatively, the revised standard would be more complex to implement. We are going to develop some implementation guidelines. And there could be more trips if more smaller developments are built. Staff is recommending some changes to the open area standards. The open area standards in the highest intensity zone are actually a disincentive for density. They could end up with being a requirement of roughly 50% of lot area being common usable open area. The new open area standards are more consistent with the North Bay Shore Precise Plan. They're also fairly consistent with this approved project, the site plan shown on left on San Antonio, which is under construction now, in terms of the interpretation of what counts as common usable open area. Staff is also recommending some flexibility for mixed use to double count open area under very specific circumstances, to count emergency access areas as open area under very specific and design reviewed circumstances, and to add a open area standard for hotels. Other recommended changes to the precise plan are summarized in Exhibit 10. These changes had clear council direction, and so they were not included in the staff report. In addition, there are minor changes to word choice and such that are shown in track changes in Exhibit 4. So the question for EPC on this slide is, does the EPC have any additional comments or recommended changes on the draft precise plan? In addition to the draft precise plan, staff is seeking EPC recommendation on a new general plan designation, the East Wisman mixed use designation. There would be a new zoning district that covers the East Wisman precise plan area, and it would replace all of the existing zoning districts in the area. One of the zoning districts in this area that only exists in this area is the Transit Floating District, the T District, which was formerly used to allow additional density on specific project sites near the Middlefield and NASA Bayshore light rail stations. The East Wisman Precise Plan effectively replaces this role for the city, and so staff, in order to maintain the zoning ordinance, is recommending that the EPC recommend repeal of the transit zone and the TOD permit, which is only implemented in the transit zone. As the EPC reviewed at the beginning of the summer, there was a draft environmental impact report that was released in June. There were impacts to vehicle miles traveled and transit delay. In addition, there were intersection deficiencies identified at 7 local intersections and multiple regional freeway segments. We did receive letters from 8 individuals, agencies, and organizations. The responses were provided in the final EIR in the packet, and no additional impacts were identified from comments or these precise plan revisions. The next step for this project, some stakeholders may be interested to see the City Council study session on the school strategy on October 15th, and then council adoption for this project on November 5th. So the next few slides summarize the lengthy recommendation language for these 6 actions. that staff is recommending. If the EPC is interested in modifying the precise plan, we ask that you, clearly read off the section and the revised language for what should be modified, and we can note that into the action for the recommendation. Alternately, like I said, EPC can recommend modifications, or the EPC can find that the proposed benefits of the project do not outweigh the impacts and recommend denial of the EIR. So here's a summary of the questions for the meeting. Staff is available with any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So now, since this is a public hearing, we'll move on to doing this in the standard order for a public hearing. We'll start with general questions from the commission, and then we'll open it up to hearing comments from the public, and then we'll come back for any follow-up questions and deliberation from the commission. So one other thing that I did talk to staff about before we started the meeting was the question of, given that we have 7 different areas that we're potentially going to discuss tonight, of whether or not we should do a show of hands about the areas that are of particular interest to commissioners where they want to have some, significant discussion. Do you think that's still a good thing to do tonight, Eric?
Yeah, I think there are also potentially other topics that the EPC is going to want to discuss outside the 7 or 8 listed, and there should be an opportunity for EPC to provide those as well.
Okay. Would now be a good time to go through that, or should I wait until after we have the initial questions?
Maybe after questions and public comment.
Okay. And one other question, procedural question. If people have questions that might relate to the EPC questions on a top-level scale, is it okay to ask these initially, or should they wait until we get to the individual topics?
Sorry, you're saying...
Like if they wanted to ask about, say, like jobs, housing linkage, just some general clarifying questions, or about, some of the, like the Summerhill letters or any of this kind of thing. Is that good to do ahead of time or on the specific topic?
You mean the EPC questions?
Yes.
Yeah. I think we can do, if we're going to be asking what topics wish to be discussed, then maybe getting the questions out of the way beforehand, all of them might make sense.
Okay, sounds good to me. All right, so we'll turn this then back to the commission for general questions and high-level questions on the specific areas that staff has asked us to discuss, as well as just questions about particular topics of interest to commissioners that were not outlined in the report. Are there commissioners that have high-level questions to ask? Commissioner Cranston?
Just a couple. In the marked up version of the precise plan, it's page 66. I guess it's 3.3.3.4. Is where the language that allows the incorporation of the shared common spaces. It says, in the mixed-use project, the same common usable open area may satisfy multiple portions of uses of common area requirements, subject to review of appropriate program accessibility, compatibility, and time of use. And I guess what I was left with the question is, who is that staff review? How is that evaluated of whether this would be permitted or not?
Staff would make a recommendation on it to the approving body.
Okay. Are there any existing criteria that would be used for that, or would?
The criteria are that the programming would be appropriate to both uses. That is, that it would be appropriate for both, residential users and non-residential users. That the space is accessible to both residential users of the site, and non-residential spaces. That the spaces are compatibly designed in terms of both aesthetics and operations, hours. When we review these plans, we try to think about all the ways that they might be used and potential sources of conflict and impact.
That's the first question. Second one, I didn't have the opportunity to go back to listen to the council discussion on the additional height in the, around the station. And the staff report just said they asked you to look at it. Can you provide a little context as to, was there some specific concerns that they had, or what was the basis for that request?
There actually wasn't discussion at council. They discussed the all the points of the staff report, and then they followed up saying at the end of the meeting, they said, and here are some other things that staff should look into.
And the 750-foot radius, where did that come from?
Yeah, 50-foot radius is generally considered a walkable quarter mile from that station area, which is the area we're trying to activate with ground floor, retail, and other active pedestrian uses. So by providing that height incentive in that area, it can both allow for greater ground floor retail and potential open space in that walkable radius.
Thank you.
Okay, are there other questions from the commissioners? Okay, I have a few then. So one of the things that was noted in the questions that was sent earlier to staff before the meeting asked a little bit about the 135-foot height limit, and made notice of the fact that in the community workshop, I would say there wasn't a clear, strong support for really large heights. And yet, I just want to make sure that, would you say that it's fair to say that council understands that 135-foot height limit is being proposed and they've had a chance to discuss it and think it through?
So I would say that council has not specifically reviewed 135 feet.
Okay. I mean, has there been any sense coming back from council on what they think is, the appropriate height limit? Because I'll disclose I had a chance to talk to two developers, Summerhill and Lend-Lease and Google, before this meeting. And, they showed me some plans that they're contemplating. And, they're clearly thinking in terms of, over 10-story buildings. And so, this wasn't shown in the community workshop. And so I'm trying to get a sense of whether this is going to be a surprise to council or not, or whether, that's in the envelope of thinking in terms of the precise plan right now.
Well, it's certainly up to council to accept or reject the proposed language. We were asked to look at potential additional height near the station.
Okay.
And so we were proposing language in response to that, and certainly council can determine that it's too much or modify it.
All right, that's fair. So there was some discussion. A key point in the precise plan has been the jobs housing linkage, and we had been talking in terms of 3 units per 1,000 square feet of office, and I want to confirm or you tell me differently, whether the precise plan as it stands now is still proposing that 3.0 units per 1,000 square feet.
Yes.
Okay. And another question that came up in the letters that we got from Summerhill and Miramar is the idea of, you know, the TDR residential projects, whether or not they would have, you know, a marketable credit that comes from, you know, their participation in, you know, the TDR and East Western Precise Plan. Certainly, I think it was clear to everybody that that once the Precise Plan is in place, you know, there is some credit that a residential developer can get, you know, in order to help make his project more feasible. But one developer raised the issue that he was surprised that that wasn't applied back to his project, which is part of the TDRs. And so I'm wondering, I want to hear a little bit more from staff as to the rationale of what they've written. And I was also told that they might have been talking to you today, and I wonder if there's any meeting of the minds and coalescing of ideas that have happened since he talked to me earlier today.
Well, we have been, you know, brainstorming internally as staff about this issue for the last week or two. You know, it's a quickly evolving scenario, and staff is interested in hearing EPC's ideas on it, and kind of what the EPC's priorities are. So, you know, the original intent was to acknowledge that the jobs housing linkage requirement would be very difficult for the office projects to comply with after the fact, right? The way the Precise Plan is set up, if you're an office project, you kind of already have to have a residential project identified in order to move forward. So acknowledging that it's very difficult for a project that's already submitted to kind of go back and try to find somebody that, you know, a residential project that could basically hold them hostage, right? And keep them, you know, keep bleeding them for money just to get to the next step in the process, basically. So in order to avoid that scenario and in order to facilitate the TDR projects, we identified that this group of projects all came in before the jobs housing linkage program was started, and that if they all come through together, they are in balance, and then the office projects don't have to worry about finding a residential partner. This has the negative effect, though, of making it so that the residential projects can't partner with somebody else, because then you're out of balance, right? Then you're creating office based on the residential that's already in balance with this other office, right? So that was the scenario that we proposed to the EPC and council. You know, again, you know, an evolving conversation. We recognize now that it does create a disincentive for the residential projects to stay with the TDR. Like I said, we are working on a range of potential ideas. You know, I don't know how much I can say right now because they are very draft form at this point, and you know, we would be interested in hearing the EPC's priorities on things like, you know, how important is it for the office TDR projects to go through without being forced to partner? How important is it for the residential projects to be able to have these monetary resources that they were counting on, and other, you know, other potential considerations?
Okay, I think that's fair. I appreciate your explaining the situation and where you are in the discussion process right now as you try to move toward a resolution. So another question that I had was, we talked about the 70,000 foot threshold on the review of projects, and I did go look through the exhibit of the projects that you mentioned, but they're all office projects, and I'm wondering, but it sounded like from the staff presentation that that 70,000 square foot threshold would also apply to residential projects. Is that right?
That's right.
Can you give me an idea, like the Summer Hill project? How many square feet is that?
I don't know exactly, but it's certainly over 400,000.
Okay, and maybe Mr. Hickey can tell me. Do you know how many it is? Okay, okay. So it would be, it would make the grade in terms of a review if a similar project came by.
Well, any project that size would almost certainly be bonus FAR anyway.
Okay, okay, fair enough.
So, we'd be talking about 1.0 FAR projects, and 70,000 square feet would probably be, 50 to 70 units.
Okay, okay, that's good. And let's see. I wanted to ask about the change in the composition, okay, of the unit mix. So one of the things that concerns me is that when we did the North Bay Shore Precise Plan, we broke it down to 40, 30, 20, 10, where 40% was studios, 30% one bedrooms, 20% two bedrooms, and 10% three bedrooms. And, but I was concerned at the way that this was rewritten because the two bedrooms and three bedrooms are lumped together, and so there could be a potential of there being no three bedrooms built. Well, I know now that there won't be none because if Summerhill goes forward, they will provide some as part of their project. Okay, but I'm wondering, another comment I heard in talking with the people that I mentioned earlier that I've talked before the meeting was that the targets on the unit counts are a bigger issue in the East Wistman Precise Plan because of the jobs housing linkage. The unit counts link to whether you can do the project, whereas in the North Bay Shore Precise Plan, they're more advisory. In the sense, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I mean, I'm wondering what your thinking on this is. I mean, are the ones in the North Bay Shore Plan just aspirational? Or is there some way that, what is the difference in how they would be dealt with in the East Wistman Plan and in the North Bay Shore Plan?
Well, the intent was to have them implemented similarly as guidance. So if a project, when a project comes through, they would identify the current mix in the area and what their project is doing to that current mix. And so that staff and the commission and council could kind of keep tabs on the evolving growth of the area and modify policy if necessary. So, do we need to provide additional incentives? Do we need to encourage certain developers to provide more of a certain type of unit? However we decide to modify policy. It's not intended to be a strict standard that every project needs to comply with. So part of the goal of some of these revisions was to clarify that kind of aspirational and advisory and monitoring role, but then also to provide ranges so that there isn't the expectation that a project needs to hit 40% exactly, and to acknowledge that future's uncertain and we don't know exactly how many studio units are going to get built.
Okay, thank you. Those are my only introductory questions. Do any other commissioners have questions before we open this up to public comment? Commissioner Lau.
Thank you. I do have a quick follow-up on the TDR program that we talked about. So when the 5 projects were bundled together, Eric, you had mentioned in the notes that there's slightly more residential than office, resulting in about 13,000 square feet of net new office available.
130,000, yeah.
Sorry, 130,000. So how is that square footage intended to be utilized?
So in the May staff report and decision that is guiding this whole discussion, staff acknowledged that there is another East Wisman project that is intending to purchase TDRs from the school district. It's the project on South Bernardo. The we call it the Vani project. It's a site owned by Vani and his company. So they would, if they were to go up to 0.75 FAR plus the TDR, they would be allowed about 270,000 net new square feet of office plus the TDR. So it's a very large site, and they would be building a lot of net new floor area. So the 130,000 the goal was to be a portion of that 270,000 that he could consider covered under the jobs housing linkage requirement, but that if he wanted more than 130,000, he would need to find another residential project to partner with.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Capriles?
I'd like to kind of go back to the height, the height limitation or recommendation, 135 feet. Is that really an effort to have mixed use? And because they mentioned that, they'd like to have more height in order to have, the bottom levels be a little bit higher, but it's hard to envision the 135 feet is estimated how many stories, and does a grocery store or other commercial, is that like, would you say that would be 2 stories? I mean, help me visualize, please.
Yeah. Yes, you are required to provide ground floor commercial if you want this additional height bonus. 135 feet, I would estimate 10 to 11 stories. The ground floor commercial space itself is usually not more than 1 story. Okay. There's just not much appeal for retail or other commercial uses to not be on the ground floor and kind of visible and accessible from the street. But in a lot of cases, especially grocery stores and a lot of other commercial uses, they like to have a lot of extra height. Part of that is to have the interior character that they want. Part of that is for additional equipment and HVAC and things like that they might need. Part of it is to create a lot of visibility on the ground level for the public to know that, hey, this is a destination. There are lots of reasons why they like to have a lot of ground floor height. So that could be one reason why somebody might want additional height, is to accommodate that taller ground floor for the commercial use. That wouldn't necessarily add stories, though. The purpose of the stories, staff recognizes that the maximum FAR in the high-intensity office area is a lot to fit into 8 stories, given our expectations for publicly accessible paths, open areas, ground floor commercial, which doesn't count to FAR. So if you want to accommodate all of these other things on a site, it's very difficult to get the maximum FAR within the 8 stories identified in the precise plan. So in a lot of cases, in order to create these really, really high quality open spaces that we're looking for, you have to take that floor area, which would have covered more ground, and kind of stack it up taller. That's where the additional height recommendations, the additional story recommendations is really coming from.
Yeah, because I think that, one of the concerns is, we have so much, as you say, ground space to go and to keep going up and up and up. I mean, we have one 10-story building in the city, and I think that, based on my recollection of all the precise plans we've done, we've always, talked about 8 stories. So, push comes to shove, are we giving up, the open space in an effort, or, in an effort to add open space? We're trying to go up so it makes it more feasible for the developer, and, are we getting to the point where we're gonna be a little Manhattan?
Well, I think part of the goal of the design standards, so we have distance standards between where these tall buildings can be, and we also have maximum dimensional standards of how big the buildings can be. So a part of that is to avoid the kind of Manhattanization. And this area too, this 750-foot radius is actually smaller than the area in North Bayshore that's allowed to go up to 14 stories. So it's a compact area, and it is thousands of feet from Wisman Road, and other kind of potential visual impact areas.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Yin.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. One was about the open space, and if we decrease the required open space, I was wondering if there was language or definitions associated with high quality. As we lose amount of space, I wanted to just ensure that what we do have is the highest quality.
We don't have that language specifically. Staff would be interested in hearing what some of those characteristics are. That would be quality. Certainly, we do, very thorough review of all of our open areas for landscape design, improvement design, making sure that there's a broad range of amenities in every residential development. We also have design guidelines that will guide how that kind of quality is created. So if the commission, certainly if the commission is looking for something additional in terms of the quality of the open area, we can look at adjusting that.
Okay. Another question was regarding the master plan change. Where is that? The development reserve, and that it was noted that one small side effect may be that smaller companies would be, or smaller projects would be at disadvantage because more of the development reserve would be allocated to large projects for longer periods of time. And I already understand why staff is making the recommendation, and I totally get that. I was just wondering if a proportion of the development reserve could be allocated for small projects, not necessarily that it has to go to, but that we try to balance out the disadvantage of smaller companies. That was thought of.
Yeah, that's a possible idea. I think staff would have a very hard time figuring out how much.
Sure.
And there would be some risk in the long run, especially if you bake it into a precise plan, that council would have less flexibility to give the development reserve to projects that they consider worthy. So it just kind of reduces the flexibility of council. But if commission has any other ideas, we can, or discussion, we can certainly make that recommendation to council too.
Well, knowing what projects are coming forward, is there any chance that one company could just take all of the development reserve, given the limitations of FAR and heights and all that? Is that a possibility?
It's unlikely. The draft plan for this Maud Clyde area that Google has proposed, I think is looking at 600,000 to 700,000 square feet, which is a big chunk, but it's not all by any means.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cranston.
I guess a follow-up, and for the longer-term EPC members, forgive my question. What is the typical duration of a master plan? I don't have a sense of context as to if you put in place a master plan, is it generally laying out 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? I mean, what is, you've kind of limited it to, they've got to do something, pretty much everything within 2. Is that the typical duration of a master plan? I mean, what are they? So I don't have a context.
Yeah, so the only master plans that I've actually seen come through have been simultaneous with the planned community permit. Martin, do you know of any projects?
No, I mean, we really haven't used them extensively in Mountain View in the past. There was one out in South Wisdom was the most recent, I believe, but it's not something that we've really used extensively, and that's why Mr. Anderson has put in that language for restricting the timeline when it must be acted upon.
Yeah, and the purpose originally with master plans really is about, confirming that the project can be done and that all the utilities are accounted for and that it will be completed in an order that, ensures that the city gets certain public benefits and open space and things like that. So in that sense, they have a timeline of the construction of the project, right? In this case, when the master plan areas are potentially very large and complex, staff wants to make sure that the council has an opportunity periodically to come back in and make sure that this development reserve floor area is being used as effectively as they want it to, or towards the projects that they want it to.
I have one follow-up question on that. In one of the discussions that I had earlier with a Google representative, they raised a concern that a 2-year period was too short for them to be able to manage everything that you were asking for. In particular, they raised the question that, first they're going to need to demolish the office, which means they have to find a place for everybody to go. And then, getting everything else lined up, and they might not be able to do it in a 2-year period. And then they asked, well, what about if we could put together a phasing plan that would guarantee some kind of certainty that the development would actually happen? Could it go over a period longer than 2 years? And so I offered to raise this question just to get your thoughts on this, to see that there needs to be some convergence, particularly for them as they try to plan their Middlefield Station project.
Yeah, and certainly staff recognizes that. Our concern is kind of in terms of regulatory overlap. We have a tool called a development agreement, which we often use to extend development timelines for very long periods of time. We have one now that's, I think, 10 years. And so our goal is to not have the master plan replace the development agreement, to have them be 2 separate tools and 2 separate processes that serve different purposes.
So it sounds like a partial answer you might have back for them is to consider this other vehicle for achieving their goal if, the master plan isn't the right one.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions from the commission before we open it to the public? Commissioner Capriles.
Regarding the master plan, I think originally when we came up with the master plan idea, just to follow up on your comment, the idea was to be able to deal with multiple owners of property and to make sure that everybody was aligned and in agreement. So I think that's kind of where that master plan idea came in, to, probably augment, the developer agreement that Eric alluded to. But I just wanted to, make the point there. We found that we had a lot of property that was small, but in order to, kind of pull it all together, we wanted to kind of have a vehicle such as a master plan to see if we could pull it all together to make sure we could develop a particular piece of property. So just wanted to provide that input to, follow through on Commissioner Cranston's question.
Thank you, Commissioner Capriles. Commissioner Cranston.
So are development agreements generally with a single property owner?
A development agreement is associated with a certain single project applicant. You can have as many property owners as you want on a project application.
Okay, are there other questions from the commission? All right, seeing none, I will open this public hearing to public comment. How many people want to comment on the East Western Precise Plan? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's not that many. So each person will get 3 minutes. Please, when you come up here, please state your name and also fill out a blue card for staff so that we can have your name recorded appropriately in the minutes for the meeting.
Hi again, Albert Jeans. Could you restart the clock, please? Yeah, 3 minutes is not long. Yeah, I just wanted to say something. Again, it's about traffic, of course. It's my pet peeve, I guess. And I submitted well, first of all, as Eric mentioned, Fair and Piers did a pretty good, thorough traffic impact analysis. They identified something like 17 intersections that would be severely degraded, but that could be mitigated with the proper improvements. And I submitted a lengthy public comment, which actually found its way into the FEIR, although it was actually intended to be for the precise plan, where I commented about why the precise plan itself makes almost no mention of possible improvements that will need to be made in order to get people in and out of East Wisbon. It just talks a little bit about internal roads, pedestrian paths, things like that, but nothing about this massive amount of public improvement that's going to be needed to make East Wisbon feasible. I mean, I guess they're going to be talking about a school strategy. How come there's not a transportation strategy? It seems like any kind of decent urban planning has to consider, transportation. In Japan, they actually build a subway station before they build the city. They know that it's going to be necessary. And I fail to realize why I looked through the precise plan. I didn't find any mention of how the surrounding roads are going to be handled. And I think some of the surrounding cities and other organizations also were kind of wondering how that was going to happen. I don't know what you can do about that. I understand that, for example, the reply was, yeah, the state now doesn't recognize, intersection performance as a environmental impact, and so, yeah, it doesn't have to really be addressed in the EIR. That doesn't make the problem go away. Mountain views of cities is still going to have to deal with it. And as you know from Shoreline and other places, it can get very bad. And so I don't know if there's something you can do to add something to the precise plan saying, they should take these recommendations from Fair and Piers more seriously or something, but it seems like there should be some mention about overall transportation in the precise plan. I mean, they go into, excruciating detail on road widths, appearances, building appearances, setbacks and all that. And yet there's nothing about how you're going to get people in and out of this place. So I don't know. Yeah, at this stage, I don't know if you can do something about that, but I'll keep hammering away at this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
My name is Robert Holbrook. I'm speaking to you as a Mountain View resident who's concerned about airplane noise. Over the last several years, I've spent many hours working on this and participated in community forums that are trying to address the increase in airplane noise over Mountain View. And I wanted to share with you some of my findings and a few thoughts that might impact the precise plan. Airplane noise has been concentrated into rails. There are two rails that separate over at a point in West Sunnyvale. One of them continues over Mountain View and this City Hall up toward Palo Alto. The other goes basically over Wisman Avenue. There is every likelihood that an increase in the proportion of traffic will shift to Wisman Avenue over time. And we know that San Jose Airport, which is where the airplanes are heading, is one of the fastest growing airport in the country. The mayor says it's the fastest. I believe that there could be 400 airplanes a day in 2030, or at least a number close to that, on days when we have traffic over us. Now, this is the rub. Only 1 in 7 days are weather conditions such that the air traffic is over us, and those days are concentrated in the winter months. So it would be easy for a developer to miss the fact that airplane noise can be a significant issue during those months and pass on the opportunity to install windows that could give residents better protection against the noise. What I encourage you to consider is whether or not the precise plan can in some way ensure that developers are made aware of the situation with regarding air traffic above us, which I want to say is at about 2,500 feet over Wisman Avenue, and the planes are descending to 1,800 feet over Moffett. Can the developers be made aware of the situation with regard to aircraft noise so that they can make an informed decision about the kind of windows and sound insulation that they might want to equip their buildings with? I think if they were to do that in a thoughtful way, we would end up with happier residents, happier office goers, and overall more satisfaction with this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holbrook. Next.
Randy Kenyon, representing Los Altos School District. I'm here again to remind you how critical the TDR program is to us, enabling us to acquire a site in the San Antonio section of Mountain View and build a school and parks in that area for the neighborhood. Many, probably more than half of our TDR buyers are in the East Wisman precise plan area. And Commissioner Cox brought up the issue a little earlier tonight. It is increasingly troubling to us to hear the concerns of the developers in the East Wisman precise plan area, especially those with residential projects who are trying to determine if they can make their plans work within the precise plan requirements. I don't pretend to understand all the complexities involved and all the issues that face you guys that you have to consider this evening, but I'm worried, we are worried in the school district that there may be enough uncertainties that would cause some or all of our TDR buyers to bail on us. This would put our purchase of the San Antonio site at serious risk. It is good to hear tonight that there's some discussion about some solutions regarding some of the issues that have been brought up, so we're pleased to hear that. So just please take into consideration the comments from the TDR buyers tonight and my comments as you proceed with your deliberations. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kenyon. Next.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is John Hickey. I'm here tonight speaking on behalf of Summerhill Housing Group. I want to start by saying that we do appreciate the effort that staff has made to address so many of the comments and recommendations that we and other stakeholders have made regarding the precise plan through this process. We are, however, still very concerned about several issues that we believe pose a substantial challenge for residential development in the plan area, especially for the LASD TDR projects. As we explained in the letter that we submitted yesterday, and as Miramar Capital explained in the letter that they submitted earlier today, the precise plan unfortunately threatens to take away the opportunity for the residential TDR projects to participate in the jobs housing linkage strategy. And in so doing, unfortunately, the precise plan undermines one of the council's key goals for the precise plan, which is, of course, to support residential development in the plan area. Now, as we know, the jobs housing linkage strategy is essential to the success of the precise plan because it encourages commercial developers to partner with residential developers so that the creation of new jobs doesn't outpace the creation of new homes and new housing. The staff report explains that the City Council wants to group all of the LASD TDR projects together, and we agree with that. But we don't think that the Council intended to undermine the residential TDR projects by taking away their chance to benefit from the jobs housing linkage strategy. Now, I want to make it very clear, we're not asking here for any special treatment for the residential TDR projects. We're just asking for them to receive the same benefit from the jobs housing linkage strategy as non-TDR residential projects will. In our letter, we proposed what we believed is a simple way to achieve a fair and equitable treatment for the residential TDR projects. But we are certainly open to working with staff to consider other options that would achieve the same result. The key is simply that the residential TDR projects should receive the same benefits as the non-TDR residential projects. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hickey. Next.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Ellis Burns. I'm a consultant working, and with me is Jennifer Rank, an attorney with Shepard and Mullins, and we're here representing Perry Herrera from Miramar Capital, the owners of 400 Logue. You received a letter from Miramar Capital earlier today, and we'll let the letter speak for itself. From the earlier speaker, I think we have the same concerns for the TDRs. I just have 2 points that we'd like to get some clarification on. The first is related to as you are deliberating over the recommendations, recommendation 6 talks about a recommendation regarding resolution to approve the draft administrative guidelines for the East Wisman Precise Plan job housing linkage. We hope as you consider that recommendation, you take into account what staff has discussed tonight, the opportunity to spend some time working out some of the details. So we hope that as you're deliberating, you consider that. And we appreciate staff effort to work with us, to work with all the TDR developers to try to make this happen. So we really appreciate that. The second point of clarification, I was wondering if Eric, you could pull up figure 2. This is related to the height exception. And it's just a clarification. I want to make sure we understand this because it happens that the property 400 Logue is literally out just the next property over outside. If you look on Logue Avenue, it's the next property over that is not included in this circle. Thank you. And we are proposing, because we are a gatekeeper, a project that has 2 buildings, one of which does go up to 11 stories. So we want to make sure that we would be included in this height exception, or understand a little further how that would work. So those are my 2 comments and requests for clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Just a question back to staff. I mean, once you get out of this blue circle, I mean, what do the heights step back to?
Well, for normal development projects, the heights would step down to the maximum 95 feet.
Okay, that's about 8 stories, or?
Yeah, 7 to 8 stories.
Okay.
The 400 Logue project is purchasing about 60,000 square feet of floor area from the Los Altos School District. That floor area would need to be accommodated somewhere on the site, and the draft precise plan does include language to give flexibility to TDR projects to accommodate the floor area that they are purchasing based on development standards.
Thank you. So unless there are other members of the public that want to stand up and address the commission tonight on 5.1 East Wisman Precise Plan, I will close input from the public and bring it back to the commission for additional questions on specific areas and deliberation and potentially a resolution for the precise plan. So let's see, can we go back to the list of topics that we are going to cover? And I guess one question I had is that in terms of this list has 7 items on it, and yet I think I counted 5 questions in the staff report. So which would you prefer we follow as we walk through this stuff?
So there are, I guess there are literally 9 questions here. The 5 questions in the staff report are, you know, were based on a kind of prioritization that staff had for, you know, kind of what to focus on. But if the EPC has specific topics that they want to focus on, whether listed here or not, then it may be beneficial to see what those topics are, to focus conversation on those.
Okay, so then here's what I'll do. Let's take a look at item number 2, and let's just do a show of hands on each of these 7 topics under number 2 to see which ones commissioners are interested in commenting on, and then I can add additional topics that they might want brought up. Okay, so on number 1, the 70,000 foot limit for review. Can I see a show of hands of people who would like to discuss this? I guess, does that mean that, that we're mostly okay with that recommendation? Okay. Yeah, and I would say the same thing. I mean, you know, the question about, you know, I think that the Summer Hill project on residential is a good dividing line. I'd like to see a review on something like that. Smaller things, I don't think we need to. So we'll say that we're going ahead with the staff recommendation on that number. Okay, how about master plans? Nope, okay. How about character area targets? Okay, Bill wants to do character area targets. Okay, me too. But in particular, I wanted to talk about the housing mix that was under that item. Okay. Then what about height exceptions? Okay. Height exceptions. Neighborhood commercial. All right, we're okay with that. Office TDM. Looks like we're okay with that. And open area. Commissioner Yin, did you want to talk about open area more? Or?
I think Eric had already
Okay, Eric already answered
my
your questions. Okay.
and I'm comfortable.
Okay, so then from section 2, we'll just concentrate on those two items. And then are there additional items that we want to cover tonight with regard to the precise plan? Commissioner Lowe.
So when we come to other comments, I do have
Okay.
some recommendation for chapter 4.3 regarding on-site open space and landscaping.
Okay. Okay. And are there other issues people would like to discuss tonight on the precise plan? Okay, I'll take that well, we will talk about number 1. Okay. So anyway, all right, that sounds good. So that will allow us to use our time efficiently tonight because, you know, as we talked about with staff earlier on, I mean, the goal here is for commissioners to make sure that they can focus their attention on areas that they have a particular interest in and want to influence the result while not compelling them to discuss areas that they're largely in agreement with staff. Okay, so then having done that, let's go back to question number 1. Does the EPC support the draft jobs housing linkage program guidelines? And would the EPC like to give input on the LSAD TDR projects? Do I have a commissioner who would like to start with that one? Was that you, Commissioner Capriles? Okay, go ahead.
I guess that my concern here with this is to try to get, come to some kind of, I think it's probably going to be a compromise now on what are the benefits that are being denied these projects that are so important, that they feel that they are being disincented. So, not knowing the real low-level details, because in the precise plan, it's pretty high level. So I would like to really have a further understanding of the details of exactly where's the difference here? What are the, I'd like to see what a project would normally receive benefit-wise, and then what a TDR project does or does not receive. And where are we at an impasse?
Yeah. So outside of the TDR program, residential projects would be able to sell the rights for an office developer to build office floor area. So what the jobs housing linkage does is says that the pardon me. I just gave a presentation on this in Santa Barbara, so I should have it right off the tip of my tongue, but I don't. I apologize.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So what the Jobs Housing Linkage Program does is it creates a strong incentive to build residential by giving them additional monetary resources that come from the office that wants to build. So the office developer would need to partner with a residential project in order to build. And that requirement would presumably be associated with some kind of financial resource, some kind of financial support. Because the residential projects in the TDR program are kind of forced into partnership with each other by virtue of the fact that they're all in this one TDR program, those residential projects don't have the same leverage or opportunity to ask for financial resources. So it's unclear. We don't know right now how much those financial resources are worth. We're leaving it to the open negotiation, the market, the private discussions between office developers and residential developers to determine how much that's worth. Part of it would be, what's the current shortfall to actually build residential, right? How much more money does a residential developer need today to build, given the cost of construction, the cost of land, and the cost of city fees and other requirements. So presumably, the office development would provide that shortfall. So that is potentially what the residential projects in the TDR program are missing out on.
And with the, is the expectation is that the TDR projects would then want to have lower fees by the city, or, what could the city do to, assist in that financial shortfall, so to speak?
Yeah. So, I'm a little hesitant to put anything out there in this public setting because we really haven't had an opportunity to vet it through, our legal counsel or other kind of what-if permutations. Certainly, the Summerhill letter had kind of an innovative strategy to take this presumptive amount and use it to offset some of their fees or some of their other requirements. Staff has some concerns about that. There's a possibility that arbitrarily or maybe it's not arbitrary, but reducing fees for certain projects under certain circumstances may not be legal, and it may put our other implementation of those fees in question. So we would, again, if that's something that we were going to pursue, we'd have to look at all the legal ramifications of it. But there are certainly other ways that this could be achieved. We could force the office projects to work with the residential projects. We could take another look at the 130,000 square feet that was going to go to the Thani project. There may be fee or other precise plan requirement opportunities that could be adjusted for the TDR projects.
Because this, to me, this just seems like a very, untapped new area for us to kind of pursue. And it seems to me that we might want to look at a particular policy that would address something like on this order, because I think to, try to put that into a precise plan without having a specific policy direction, and not to, and to have it be legal, seems to me that might be a good direction for us to pursue, because I don't want people to think we're trying to, favor one thing over another. But because it is an untapped area, we've never really done this specifically, to the best of my knowledge, the transfer of development rights, particularly between a school district and, commercial developers. So, it seems like a policy might be in order, but I'm curious to what the other commissioners are thinking.
Commissioner Lowe.
First of all, I want to disclose that I had a meeting with the Summerhill representative, and I do feel there seems to be some unfairness between the TDR residential projects versus the non-TDR residential projects, and I think we need to address that so that it doesn't become a disincentive for developers to build residential projects. And I asked earlier the question of the 130,000, and I'm wondering if staff would be able to look into that and see how we might be able to use that as an incentive so that the playing field is leveled. And I'll be curious to hear what your thoughts are too.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Cranston?
So I don't remember for certain who it was that I spoke to, but I came away with one of the earlier discussions, I think it might have been Somerville, that they actually no longer need the TDR to actually meet the guidelines of the program. Whoever it was, what it would imply is that by participating in the TDR, they're actually spending money to buy something that they don't need. And as a result, they would be losing the ability to monetize the square footage of the office space that they're retiring. So it creates the situation where if they continue to, if that's the case, then someone who's participating in the TDR would be incurring an expense at the expense of eliminating a potential source of income, okay, which is something that I would say, ooh, that stinks, if I were in their case. So I can understand the concern. I don't know whether that's still the case or not, but it seems like a pretty serious disconnect. The advantage of the TDR program is it allows them to go into the area of the program that is today considered bonus FIR, theoretically the offset is that these other things they would normally have to pay for by going into the bonus level, they don't have to pay for, so there's should be some benefit there associated with it. So my hopefully there's still a good guy there at the end of all this. My first instinct says let them participate in the transfer program, but then what that creates is a situation where they could simply say, well, I'm going to sell that space to somebody who's not in the TDR program, and the office developers who are also on the list now are screwed because things in you're counting in, there's more than that 130,000 because there's other ones that have proposed that they actually need that in order to be able to meet their numbers. So my first thought on this was that they would be allowed to participate in the linkage program if they are selling it to someone else in the TDR program. So they can take 100% advantage of the TDR program and the linkage program if they are working, they're doing as we had kind of expected, which was that they're working together on those projects, so that not just the one that we're going to give 130,000 to, but the other projects that need that contribution would also be in a situation where they need the residential developers as well. And so that it creates a situation where, hey, if you're in the TDR program and you stay in the TDR program and you play nice with the office developers, you get all the benefit. If you go outside of that, then sorry, it doesn't work anymore. That was, because my feeling was going 100% one way hurts the school district, going 100% the other way hurts the other side of the equation, and it's something like that where it was, hey, if you're in the TDR program, you can monetize it, you can do whatever you want with it. Felt like a middle place that might work to address both needs.
Commissioner Yin, did you want to comment on this before I make a comment?
I just find it's a complex problem and very difficult to come up with solutions. Obviously, you guys aren't looking for solutions right now since it's a work in progress. I guess the overall concern I have is just that there's a little bit more parity for the residential developers. I also wasn't sure what the timeline was and whether or not there was an understanding prior to all this that there would have to be, it's okay, never mind, forget that. If we could find something that was legal, which provided some parity, which didn't also then cause complications elsewhere, would be ideal. I just don't know what those would be, not knowing the finer details of the situation. No one wants the school district to be left, high and dry. So we're sort of, coming up against a rock there. And at the same time, yeah, it is a new thing. We're working as best as we can with the new situation as it develops. I'm hoping everyone is patient enough to allow staff and us to come to some sort of compromise where there is parity. It may not be the ideal for everybody involved, but if we can get this all to work out, it would be great. So if we could have just a little bit more time for staff to think about it and come back. I don't know if it can come back to us or not, or if it just moves forward and goes to council. I'm not sure if this is our only time to make recommendations, given that it's so last minute.
So the EPC will review the individual projects.
Okay.
It's hard for the EPC to provide feedback on how those projects interrelate.
Right.
At those meetings, that's probably not possible. But I think you can get an update at that time, in terms of how the individual, how council directed the individual projects to be reviewed.
Okay. So just given the timeline, I think it's kind of hard to come right now and say, we would like this. So personally, if we can just find some more parity for the residential developers, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'll echo some of the comments that I've heard from the other commissioners and add a few other notes. I mean, in particular, you know, when I think back on the TDR process, I mean, my initial reaction when I saw what projects were coming up was, oh, wow, there's a lot of office projects and just a little bit of residential here. It kind of made me ask the question of whether or not at that point we should have given, you know, stronger incentives to get residential because, I mean, you know, we are trying to achieve a jobs housing balance not only within the East Wistman area, but in the city of Mountain View as a whole, and even we would like to inspire other places in the Bay Area and maybe even Santa Barbara to understand the importance of what's going on here, and to you know, to adopt that as well, you know, after, you know, we've taken the leadership in this role. So, you know, having listened to what Mr. Hickey said from Somerville this afternoon, a few things do come to mind. One is that, as many of the other commissioners have echoed, I think we do need to provide some kind of marketable incentive that the residential's projects can bring to bear to help shore up the viability of their projects relative to the office projects. And so I would support, you know, some way of making that happen. Since this is, as it's been mentioned, right, this is coming in at the 11th hour. I leave it open to staff to continue their negotiations and figure out what is best, and in terms of their recommendation to council. And, you know, the developers will do the same. I think the great thing about being on the EPC is we're at the 11th and not the 12th hour, so there's still time. So I applaud you and encourage you in that direction. I want to echo what Mr. Cranston said about, given that, you know, there were certain advantages in the TDR program itself, that, you know, making that balance work within the TDR program is a good thing to do. And just also to say that, well, just to say that I encourage you to go forward with this because, as Commissioner Yin pointed out, making the whole thing work is very important for the LASD school district and all of the Mountain View students within it. So that's that. So those are my comments on that. So in terms of, so I guess we've all just talked about the LASD TDR projects. Let me just ask Eric, do you feel that you've gotten enough input from us given the state of things? I think the clear thing that comes across is that I think a majority of people have specified that they believe that there should be some way for residential projects to be compensated from office projects, even though they are in the TDR program. But we're leaving the details to be worked out.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
Okay. Was there any other major point that we wanted to make back to staff at this point that I missed? Okay. So, and then generally, we also have to answer the first question. Does the EPC support the draft jobs housing linkage program guidelines? Can we just, is a show of hands good enough for that? And does everybody support it, or does, okay, it sounds like there's general support with the guidelines as written. So that, I think we've concluded item number 1. And then let's go on to item number 2 on the particular items where we wanted to talk about them in more detail. We can start with the character area targets. In particular, Mr. Commissioner Cranston, I know I wanted to talk about the housing mix. Did you have other issues you wanted to talk about in that area?
The mix was my main concern.
Okay, so I'll let you start with your comments on the housing mix.
So I'm open to the idea of more flexibility. Commissioner Cox, or Vice Chair Cox, mentioned the elimination of the requirement for 3-bedroom earlier. And I think one of our expectations, at least certainly my expectations, as we've gone through this process, is that we hope to get more residential units in the area that would support a little bit larger families. And so having at least some percentage as three-bedroom is something that in my mind was a goal. Removing the levels all the way across the board for both the two, for combining 2 and 3 bedroom, to me feels like a step too far. I would have been more inclined to allow a little bit more flexibility. I think the previous version had 3 bedroom at 20%. Okay, make it 10 to 20. Expand the range of the 2 bedroom, but I'm concerned about eliminating the 3 bedroom call out in the plan. It feels like a step too far. So I would like to hear other commissioners' feedback on that.
Yeah, since I also called this out, I'll echo that as well. As I said, like with the North Bay Shore Precise Plan, we did have a target of 10%. And honestly, when I was the one who originally proposed the mix for the North Bay Shore Plan, and my thinking at that time was, there was a strong interest on council's point of view to get as many units up there as possible. And so, I proposed that mix as an aggressive mix towards smaller units, because, it was kind of like 98-50 or fight, okay? And so, I thought the best way to try to make such a large target would be, heavily weighting things on smaller units. But I also didn't want to, I was concerned about the idea of not getting 3-bedroom units in other projects. I go back to the time when we were reviewing 801 West El Camino, and I had talked to the developer at that time, and as he was running through with me in private the benefits of the project, he said, and we are providing 3-bedroom units. And I said to him, oh, okay, how many are there? And he said 5. And it's like a 180 unit project. And I said, well, it's not a large part of the mix. And he shot back at me, we're the only ones who are doing anything at all. And that stuck in my mind is, yeah, that's part of the problem. And, because we have typically, homes, when people get to that point where, they want to raise a family, and if they end up with a typical family with, 1 child of each sex, now we're talking largely about a 3-bedroom situation. And I'm still struck back at the time that when I first came back to the Bay Area to live, we had 7 people in the group where I worked, and 5 of us, 5 of the 7 people, when they finally decided to set down roots, moved out of Mountain View into other communities because they couldn't find family housing. The only 2 of us who stayed were the ones that didn't have children. And that's been a problem, I think, that we've had in Mountain View in general over a long period of time that I'd like to see, redressed somehow. So, yeah, I guess I would also not want to completely eliminate that category. I could also, and again, with Mr. Cranston, I think that, I had envisioned also East Wistman as being a place that was at least a little bit more family-friendly than North Bay Shore, which, might have been, in my thinking, more of a, still like a immediately post-college atmosphere. And so, having some 3-bedroom units could be helpful in that. So I guess, here's a couple thoughts. One thought is that we could put the 10% back, or at least have no worse than North Bay Shore. Another thought is, when I had talked to the representatives from Google, I asked the question, well, is part of the problem the idea that the linkage between jobs and housing is expressed in terms of units rather than in terms of bedrooms? Okay, and that, I'm not saying I would go too far on that, but maybe a 3-bedroom unit could, up to, say, 10%, could be credited at 1.5 units, okay, instead of a single unit, just, to allow more of those to happen. So those are a couple ideas, and I'm interested in what other commissioners think. Commissioner Capriles.
I think what we're trying to address is a lot of people that already have families, and we keep talking about we want people to live close to where they work. So it would be a shame to have it limited to, 2 bedrooms if you needed 3. With the cost of the housing, just the housing market in general around here, it's just, pretty ridiculous to think that we could, people could afford homes, that would accommodate the 3-bedroom needs. So, I really think that we need to, when you give ranges, 40 to 60%, what does it mean? I think that the range thing makes it really kind of nebulous as to whether you go 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom type of thing. So, is it right for us to be a little more specific as you suggest? I'm not really sure. I'm trying to look at it through somebody that would be putting together a number of units, and if you give me a range, I'm going to take the one that I think that it'd be the most marketable, out there, and maybe not necessarily what the rest of the community needs. So if we could be a little more specific. And I don't think we're asking for a high percentage, but some, just to keep that in mind.
Commissioner Yin.
Okay, well, thanks for bringing that up. I hadn't thought about it, but now that you've brought it up, I'm all for flexibility, so I understand why it was done. But I see what you're saying, and I would be open to a small number, wider range set at 3+. And the reason why I say that is because as we're developing out Mountain View, I don't see that many more single-family homes being built. I think it's going to be higher density. And if we are trying to have people stay as they move in as young couples or singles, eventually they will potentially have families, and we would like them to continue staying and not have high turnover in the city. So if we could provide for some family housing in the higher densities, the R4s and such, then I think that would be a benefit to the city. So yeah, I'm open to that.
Commissioner Lowe.
Yeah, I think you all have brought up some really good points. I do have a quick question for the staff. I wonder, what's the thinking process behind combining the 2s and the 3 into one range?
Staff was seeing the mix of condos and apartments being built, the Summerhill, Miramar projects. In ownership projects, there is actually a little bit of a market for 3-bedroom units. It's the market just isn't there in the rental, so you see a lot of the apartment projects maxing out at 2 bedrooms. So in order to provide flexibility, but also acknowledging that there is a market in the ownership, staff is certainly open to adding the 3-bedroom back in, and certainly the goal of having the range, providing the, it's not just flexibility, it's also, I think, a little bit of clarity in the policy and the implementation, right? That it's not necessarily a hard standard that if you don't meet this in every project, you're going to be denied. I think the range also kind of helps communicate that. So, certainly we would be, hopefully that answers your question.
So these are guidelines, is what you're saying, right?
They're targets, yeah.
So as a whole, for the whole plan area, we
Yeah.
try to hit this, but
Yeah.
we're not going to hold individual project to,
That's right.
okay, thanks.
So Commissioner Lowe, I didn't get an idea of where you were on the issue.
If that's the case, then I'll be okay with spelling out the 3 bedrooms having its own.
Okay.
number, yeah.
So what I think I'm hearing from the commission is that there's a majority support for a separate 3 or 3+ category. Did we want to suggest a number, or did we want to just ask that the category be put back in, or?
Can I throw out an option here?
Sure.
After talking to you on Monday, staff developed this as a potential option, this alternate, 30 to 52, 10 to 33.
Yeah, I like it. I would go with this. What do the other commissioners think? I think I see at least 4 heads nodding, maybe 5, and a smile. So that's better than 5. Okay, okay. So we'll go with the recommendation, this new one that you just put up. Oh, Commissioner Yin.
Quick question. Since you said it really wasn't something where we're going to find 3-bedroom plus units aren't something we're going to find in rentals, but it would be for ownership, and I know that the current council is really aiming for a bit more ownership. We have policy that aims for ownership specifically.
Yeah, in the new kind of diverse housing strategy, it replaces the affordable housing strategy. It gets into that, aiming for a kind of an even mix of rental and ownership in the.
Okay, so policy-wise, we are aiming for that as well, and so if we include this, it's doable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think one of the things I like about having it this way is that it does put the thumb on the scale a little bit toward ownership or partial ownership projects like Summerhill is doing. And so that's a good solution. So thank you. And let's see, let's go back to the next. So were there other questions that we wanted to raise on the character areas, or is this the only one? Okay, I think that's it for character areas. So then the next thing we wanted to talk about was height exceptions. So I'll let Commissioner Cranston lead off with that one.
I guess I understand the desire on the part of the developers. Part of my question for where this came from in council was to try to better understand what the outcome we were attending here. I'm the one that asked the question was if there was support for this in the community meetings, because I've not heard people say, "Oh yeah, let's build really tall in Mountain View." I think certainly the way that staff kind of is trying to kind of break it up, if we're gonna have the extra height, seems like a reasonable approach. But I'm more than anything else, I'm worried about Middlefield becoming a canyon. In general, if height is not visible, it doesn't bother me as much. Okay. The challenge right now is that you've centered this right on the Middlefield station, which is very close to Middlefield Road. I understand the feedback was, I guess, the consultant about it being a 750 foot, 750 feet being what people can walk. But what it's going to do is this puts, it encourages all the height right along a major road that's going to, it's basically going to be the southern part of an area that is, everybody has to hide behind their shadow in the rest of North Bay Shore. So I'm not in general in favor of the increase in height. If there were, I might be persuaded if there were more restrictions on how it was applied, so that it could be that we're not going to end up with all of the 135-foot buildings right on both sides of Middlefield Road, I would feel less, I might feel less ugh about it. But right now, the way it's set up, it's more likely to actually concentrate them right along Middlefield, which is the opposite of what I thought we were trying to go for here. So that's just my initial comments.
Okay. Okay, I'll throw a few comments in here. I guess my initial comment on this subject is just that I was just a little bit surprised, when I met with the Google representative and they gave me the sheets of paper and here are these 10 and 11-story buildings, because I did attend the community workshops and we weren't talking, that level of height. And I'm not saying that, I'm against it out of the box, but I guess what I would really like is I would like a sense of really what are we buying into when we go ahead and do this. I think what I would recommend is that when you go to council, at least the presentation that you give, has some mock-ups of what this will look like, particularly like how does this stand out with regards to the rest of the precise plan area? And, what does it look like if I'm standing on Wisman Road, from, the, single-story developments that are on that side of the road, what are they going to see? And, and also the idea of what Commissioner Cranston just brought up, the idea of what is this alternative versus having the height spread out over a wider area, look like as an alternative. That's the kind of thing that I'd like to see, so that I'd like the council to see it, I guess, so that they have a good sense of what it is they're buying into, and then they can make the right judgment. I mean, you can have good projects, with large heights, and, we can have ones that don't work that well. But, I mean, another thing, as Commissioner Cranston says, to get the sense of what it is looking when you drive down Middlefield Road. I mean, I think in terms of disclosure, that's a real good thing to have. So those are my thoughts on that. Mr. Capriles.
I think we need to look at, when we originally looked at starting with the precise plan, we felt like it would make more sense to have higher density around the transit station, simply to have people closer to public transportation and this sort of thing. But, again, what we're giving up, when we do see projects that are higher stories, and, we look at higher stories of being 8, we also look at the design. So I think what my concern is from a height perspective is that somebody's going to build an 11-story high something that is just a great big block of units, and there's no creativity in what the design is, and, that they could vary, the building designs within the project. So, that it's really hard to say, oh, we've got height exceptions, because, once you start exceptions, guess what? Everybody's going to take them. So I'm a little reticent to just, give carte blanche height exceptions out there without some concern about the design of the units and buildings that are in any complex, because, I don't think any of us want to see the, the canyon effect. And I know that we're talking about the separations of the buildings and all of that sort of thing, but this is Mountain View, and many people would like to still see the mountains. So that's one of the things that I think is important to point out, and I think that's why we didn't hear people, saying, yes, let's do 11 stories, because they don't want that shadow effect on existing properties that are in that area. So I think we just need to be very cautious and careful to limit the heights, within this particular area. I don't understand what the really point was to put a circle around this particular area other than being close to the rail station. Was there any thought behind, this particular area?
Well, it's kind of a comfortable walking distance. It's the area where we're really trying to get a lot of neighborhood commercial uses kind of
Right.
focused in this, kind of dense walkable area where you can kind of jump from business to business, on a single trip, and trip chain again with the light rail. We're also looking for some really high-quality open areas in this area to really encourage gathering, events, kind of be a marquee open space for the East Wisman area, a place to really give it a sense of place and an identity. So those are all the things that we're kind of trying to look for in this area, and in order to help kind of incentivize that vision, some additional height would help to help incentivize that vision.
Because I also noted that we're taking out the C Street, in order to promote more walkable, bikeable areas, in that area. So I'm just trying to make sure that the decisions that we do make from a height and an open space and all of that is going to make sense. What is located like outside of this area that would eliminate, varying heights, beyond this? Have we got single-family homes? Have we got? So I'm trying to just
yeah.
kind of I'm still wondering why we have this.
Sure. So this location right here is currently under construction. You see where my cursor is?
Yes, yeah.
It's currently under construction. I think it's 3 to 4 story apartments, or maybe just 3 story. And this site is currently vacant, no plans to happen there. This site is the orchard. There's no current plans for anything else there. The rest of this is part of the precise plan. So it's either going to stay what it is today. This is a 6-story office building. These are 4-story office buildings. This is a large 4-story office building, the Symantec headquarters, the big kind of teal colored building.
Okay.
So these are, it's either going to stay what it is today, or it's going to be redeveloped at higher intensity office and residential. And the nearest existing neighborhood is across North Wisman Road. I don't know exactly how far away it is, but I can look it up if you'd like to know.
No, that's okay. I'm just trying to get a general idea of, what would be in the adjacent areas where the taller buildings would, be giving their massing heights to. But in general, I think we give height exceptions per project. I wouldn't want to just see this in general in the precise plan. I think it has to be done. What does the project look like, and what does the rest of the area look like? So in general, to say, sure, build 11 stories, not sure what that message brings to the developers. So in general, I think we ought to review it per project.
Commissioner Yin.
Just a couple of quick clarification questions. For this increase to take place, as it is in the staff report, there are bullet points, 6 of them. Do all of these requirements have to be met in order for the height to jump up?
Yes, all of them.
Okay, great. And the second clarity question was to confirm that FAR and density doesn't change. It's just the height in order to accommodate the neighborhood commercial that they might be putting in.
The neighborhood commercial and the open space, yes.
And open space. Okay. I was listening to what the other commissioners had said, and I get it, and especially since neighborhoods had given input, community input. I personally am not so averse to extra height if it gains us the neighborhood commercial space, because we're trying to develop a neighborhood, and I think tying more use and service into the area helps cut back on trips and just makes it more of a neighborhood. But that's just personal. I understand their point, so I'm just wondering if maybe there are some things we can look at, such as increasing the setback at certain heights if they are going to take place. So let's say at 3 stories, it has to set back an additional amount. Or maybe just the setback in general, you get more sidewalk a little bit if it's going to go higher. Things of that nature, design-wise, that we can look at. And as far as trying to envision what it would look like, I think 3D models are great, but there's no replacement for physical models. I think when a project comes in, if we do go project by project, that we can see it, see what it looks like on the street. And I think that gives a good sense to everyone, the community as well, what that will be and how tall that will be and how that feels. It's just a thought.
Commissioner Lowe?
Yeah, picture certainly says 1,000 words, and a model probably will help too. I have lived in Hong Kong, so I'm personally not against height, just for height's sake. I think the criteria that we have listed here, calling, it has to be a neighborhood commercial building that includes ground floor commercial. It has to have variety of building heights, different, separation and whatnot. I think having these parameters helps us to, realize the vision that Eric, you were describing. One idea I have to kind of get back to your concern about making this an exception is, this may be way too late in the stage of this plan, but I wonder if it might be worthwhile to call out this area as a special character area. Right now, it's part of a pretty large mixed-use character area. If we were to carve out this area and, I don't know, call it special transit area, I don't know what's the label, then it can have its own specification. I wonder if that might be more helpful than using an exception to allow for these kind of taller buildings.
So the way the exception is structured, it allows it to be reviewed on more of a case-by-case basis rather than being kind of the default expectation. If we were to define a character area around this additional height, then that would be saying that this is the expectation, this is the community expectation, this is what we envision, rather than this is something that could be okay if we review it on a case-by-case basis and they provide all of these extra things that we really want. So it's up to the commission, which of those is kind of closer to how you would want to see this implemented, if you want to see it implemented at all.
So, we've gotten a lot of good feedback on this, but I think what I'm struggling with here is that I've heard a number of different ideas expressed, but not a real strong consensus or direction on exactly what. I guess what I would summarize to this point would be, I think we've heard that this is an area of concern of the commission that we'd like the council to take special interest in as they're reviewing the precise plan. I've heard commissioners say that they believe that the conditions for granting the exceptions are essential, and that, that they should remain intact, and that all the conditions would be met before this would be granted. I've also heard some other ideas expressed by one or two commissioners, like Mrs. Capriles' suggestion of taking things, asking for the exceptions explicitly rather than having it in the plan. I don't know, Mr. Anderson, what do you think is a good way to summarize what we've been saying?
Yeah, well, let me just kind of clarify a couple of other kind of key design points in the plan. We have this street wall requirement, which does require buildings to step back at 75 feet in height. So these tall buildings would not be right at the street. They would have to step back at that height and then go up. We also have the internal separations between buildings and the maximum building size. So part of that is intended to reduce the canyon effect. But certainly we could look at increasing those minimum separations. That would further reduce the canyon effect and reduce the likelihood that it would be all tall buildings along Middlefield. Heard certainly desire to see more visualizations. I think that's certainly something that we can do before we go to council. Heard about the importance of design. If the commission is interested in adding another precondition of kind of needing some kind of special or unique design prior to approval and needing to make that finding, could be something we could write. And then those are just some, and then the character area idea, kind of a little bit more kind of focus on this area as a height exception area, and what that character includes.
Okay. Do you feel then that you have sufficient input from us on how to modify this, or would you like something more specific?
Well, at this stage in the game, I think we might need to send something somewhat specific to council. So I don't know if you have any thoughts, Martin, on kind of how to go about figuring this out.
No, I mean, if you wanted to try to summarize, you listed out some of those items that EPC had just mentioned, and you as well, Vice Chair Cox. So if you wanted to try to consolidate that into one kind of specific direction that you can give to Mr. Anderson, then we can forward that up to council.
Okay, then I guess I would start it out by just saying that the height limitation, the height exceptions as an area of special concern of the commission. And that, partly because of, that feedback in the community workshops did not yield, overwhelming support. It was more mixed support, okay? And that, that we're looking for staff to give more visual, more pictures of, particularly about what things would look like on Middlefield Road and from the adjacent neighborhoods, and just with particular emphasis on what kind of canyon effect might result, and also to understand whether, ask council to deliberate on whether they want just the special height exceptions in this particular area, or they're more interested in having the larger heights spread over a wider area. And, you know, also whether they want a specific heights exception in the precise plan, or if they want to deal with it on a case-by-case basis. Or, look to the commission if I missed something. Commissioner Yan?
It wasn't that you missed anything, it's just that I had another thought. If you are going to list some certain ideas that come forward, another would be a limitation, would be that an entire project isn't granted this height exception. It's that if they have a neighborhood commercial, whatever, maybe it's a certain square footage, that a percent of that square footage, whether or not it be smaller or greater than, is what is granted the height exception. Because I would hate to see like a 3-block project all go up just because they provided one little shop.
That makes sense to me too. I mean, if we talk about, you know, comprehensive ground floor retail, that's different than putting a coffee shop in the corner. So.
And the only thing that I would add is that we would like to see some character within the buildings. If they, you know, meet these criteria, certainly some more design character would be appreciated.
Yeah, I also like this idea that Commissioner Capriles just mentioned, and that you also mentioned, Eric, about, you know, the idea of like exceptional design as being one of the considerations. I mean, do other commissioners agree? I see some shaking heads. Okay, so I think we've then converged on, Commissioner Cranston.
So I guess what I'm most stuck on is that it's crossing Middlefield Road. I would feel very differently about this if it was pushed up, okay? 750 feet is less than the distance from my business to the 16th Street BART station. And people walk it all the time. 750 feet is not some special magical number. But I look at Middlefield Road as quite frankly a more substantial barrier to encouraging neighborhood commercial, getting the open space than anything else. And so it's, I have questioned on multiple occasions the fact that we are dropping the height in the middle of the precise plan area from the 95 feet down to 75 and then back up. That's not that far from this area that people could walk to. So I would be, quite frankly, I would feel far better if this was located on the north side of Middlefield Road. I agree, and those are areas that are going to need open space as well. Okay, open space on the south side of Middlefield Road. It's not necessarily, you know, it'll be great for the people that are there, but it's not necessarily, you're not going to take your kids on a walk across Middlefield Road to get there. You're going to stick with the smaller streets, you know, to go play in a park. So if we can if the goal here is to make it more attractive, to provide more open space, then it seems like it would be more beneficial to keep it concentrated in the area above. That way we're more likely to get that. I question the benefits that you're expecting to see will be derived by items onto the south side of Middlefield, but we would be more likely to achieve those going farther north. And I believe that the 750-foot distance is quite, to some extent, arbitrary. And, you know, 1,000 feet, I mean, that's 0.2 of a mile. It's not even 1/4 of a mile. People walk that all the time. And so to me, the physical barrier of the street is more of an impediment than the area below than anything else. So I'm open to higher. I mean, Commissioner Yin and Commissioner Lobo said they're not as struck by the height. I'm willing to work with the additional height, but I don't think it's placed in the right location. Is my biggest concern. Nobody else has really articulated that, so I may be the Lone Ranger in this, but.
No, I don't think you are, because I think you just made a good point. I'm not sure what you meant with like the 750 being arbitrary, whether you were looking to increase it or decrease it. I mean,
I'm saying that it doesn't need to be a nice round number in all directions.
Okay,
It can be
okay.
250 feet south and 1,000 feet or 1,200 feet to the north. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to cross Middlefield Road.
Mm-hmm.
It can be in a different shape. It
So-
doesn't have to be round.
Let me ask a question to staff. Where, I can't tell from the picture, where exactly is the Middlefield station? Is it where the word is there? Is that where the light rail stops?
Yeah, it's a platform that goes roughly
Okay,
from here to
okay,
here.
so it is on the north side then. Okay, so here's another thought, leveraging off of what Commissioner Cranston just said, right? We have that Loge building up there that's on the north side that's asking to be higher. And if we were to shift this up, that would kind of like put it in there, while, you know, maybe that's a better centering. I am sympathetic to what Commissioner Cranston just said, in that, you know, it may be easier to envision something viable without so much of a canyon effect if the larger parts of the height were on one side of the road where, I mean, the part where most of it is now anyway. So I'm interested in your reactions to that, and also if you want to pose that perhaps as an additional question to council of whether, you know, this area, if they should choose to have one, you know, should be here or where Commissioner Cranston is thinking.
So I guess what I'm hearing is, you know, the clear direction not to cross Middlefield Road. So maybe seeing if you have maybe another commissioner that would get a majority with you two on that. Then in addition, I'm hearing, you know, potential shifting northward, you know, and there could be other range of considerations. I don't know if you. Are you disagreeing? Okay. Do you want to say that?
Where's
Lots of
it going?
deliberation, thanks, sorry. I just wanted to point out a couple of things, because the condition of Middlefield isn't necessarily today what it might be in 5 or 10 years, and what happens south of it might be different. And so if you look at some of the improvements that are recommended in the implementation chapter in terms of transportation improvements, mid-block crossings, greenways, and then open space identified south of Middlefield, those are also just things, that part of that consideration of maybe why it extends south beyond the other side of Middlefield as well. It's just contextual, that's all.
Okay, so I guess the question is, where do we want to go with this idea of shifting this? Do any other commissioners have a point of view on that?
I'll try.
Okay, Commissioner Yen.
To what you said, I'm hoping that it does get implemented out, the precise plan gets implemented where Middlefield Road isn't a barrier anymore, that they're more tied. And my thought was that because the station is right on Middlefield, if we are going to have neighborhood commercial, I'd like it more sort of clustered around that area. So to me, if it crosses Middlefield and you get the corners that have neighborhood commercial, yay. So I'm okay with it crossing Middlefield. I'm also okay with it, you know, just being around the park that's going to be around the station as well. But for commercial and retail, they tend to like to cluster. So it's a good option in my mind to have it cross and have that intersection be very walkable and porous between the two sides. That's the ideal, at least.
Other commissioners?
Yeah, I was going to ask staff, what do you envision in that south part of Middlefield? And I guess, sorry, what's your name? Eric. Eric provided some, but maybe you could provide a little bit more details. That way we can kind of all can visualize it a little bit better in our minds.
Sure. Yeah, so the precise plan allows, bonus FAR up to 95 feet. That's 7 or 8 stories. That could happen, with an upper floor step back along both of those properties, both these properties south of Middlefield Road. This property is currently owned by a residential developer, and they've expressed interest in redeveloping it as residential. The site is identified for a mini park in the precise plan. It is not identified for any required neighborhood commercial. So if the commission is interested in seeing neighborhood commercial on these sites south of Middlefield, you would either have to recommend changes to the required neighborhood commercial areas, or this incentive would be a way to encourage that to happen. But other than that, it would be allowed to be constructed as standalone office or standalone residential at up to 95 feet.
Well, Commissioner Cranston, Commissioner Yin wants to talk.
Oh, I was going to say, anything that encourages the neighborhood commercial, I don't know that anybody else would also want to require it south of Middlefield, but I'd be all for it. But just having the incentive there is good for me. I would limit the amount of the building or the project that goes up, depending on how much commercial there is. So that I'm pretty sold on. That's it.
So I guess the main thing here, right, is that I don't hear a third person jumping on the bandwagon for shifting the area. Okay.
I guess I'll just say, as a small business owner, I would never consider putting a business on the south side of Middlefield. Okay, so if we're requiring putting neighborhood commercial as a part of getting 135 feet, I certainly wouldn't rent a space. And what I don't want to see is what we have along El Camino Real right now, which is where we've required developers, residential developers, to put retail space on the ground floor, and then it sits there vacant for year after year after year. So I'm highly skeptical of the value of expanding the area to that side of the street and expecting that part of the requirements is they put neighborhood commercial when it's not a particularly attractive area for a small business to go into. So I think my gut says it's an unrealistic expectation that we would ever get what all of these criteria anywhere south of Middlefield. North of Middlefield, I think you could get it, because you could tie into in both the office and the residential space. But south of it, there's a barrier between there and even the further Wisman neighborhoods to the south as well. So I don't think we're being realistic on whether this would be realized in that area of the city. That's my view.
So should we just recommend to council that they consider extending the area north? Not necessarily eliminating the south area, but, they may decide not to do the commercial part of it. if they're not, you know, if they don't want the height exception. That's my understanding.
How about the idea that, that the feedback that the EPC gives, that there was some discussion about this subject and the points that we raised, and that, you know, council may want to consider that as they consider this?
So, if I may, Chair,
yeah.
just to, so
Okay.
since there will be a formal motion on this, including some of the direction that's being provided, I think it might be beneficial. You've summarized previously, I think, the points where there was at least a majority consensus, and then there was some further discussion after that. I just want to make sure that we're clear and that Mr. Anderson is clear in terms of what we're then presenting to council as EPC's
And just to kind
feedback.
of clarify, what is it adequate that the recommendation be general? Or should the recommendation be specific enough to implement in the, you know, to clearly implement in the precise plan, right? To actually write precise plan language from?
I think it could be either. I mean, I think you could just provide the indication that there was, you know, discussion on the height exceptions. If you wanted to keep it real general, there's extensive discussion, you know, about that, including some of the following and kind of list them. But I still would like to be clear about that, since it is a motion that's being made, to make it clear what you want to convey to council on that point.
Commissioner Yan?
I'm going to hope that this helps clarify. I think maybe then, Commissioner Cranston, it may not be necessary to shift it if height is already a concern for you. This is an exception. If people do all these things, then they get the exception to go higher. And if you don't think this is, the south of Middlefield is, there will be any takers, it actually decreases the amount of area where people will go even higher. So if it helps,
May I respond? Go ahead.
shifting
So,
upwards would just increase.
The idea of trying to build a community around the Middlefield station, I get, okay, I like that idea. The idea of giving developers something that, okay, you go an extra floor or two, you're gonna give us a little more open space, that's a good thing. So, in my mind, it's less a concern about whether we allow it than it is, are we gonna get what we want out of doing it? If what we want is to get more neighborhood commercial, and we want to get more, you know, open space as part of it, then let's put it in an area that it might actually produce that. We're trying to set it around Middlefield Station. Well, maybe it extends a little bit farther north, okay? And it becomes a place that the offices, people in the offices can walk to, people that are in other areas of the residential can walk to as well. It doesn't have to be all down in that area, and we've listed the commercial as a target area, but I don't know we've said that if somebody were to go a little bit beyond the commercial area, that we'd say, ooh, no, you can't do that. But if it creates a little bit of a corridor, okay? I look at Castro, people, it's all on a block, okay? They're all walking back and forth along the block. You get farther from those downtown blocks and people don't go there. So I'm looking at this as if we believe that we're trying to get that open space, we're trying to get that little bit of commercial viability, then let's look at it as more than just the station itself, and look at extending it potentially a little bit, giving the option of it being able to extend a little bit farther so that we actually get those things. Because I do have a concern that the 5,000 square feet is actually pretty small. You'll get a Starbucks is what, 1,500 square feet, okay? So you get you get maybe one little restaurant and a Starbucks, and that's it with the 5,000 square feet that's being proposed. Could we get a little bit more? Could we get a couple of restaurants? Could we get a dry cleaners? Could we get a bank? Those would be good things in my mind. So I'm looking at it as, I like the idea of getting some of these things. I don't believe that as included, we will realize the potential benefits that this is proposing that we might be able to derive from increasing the height.
Okay. Here's my thought, okay? And that's that, I hear that Commissioner Cranston is very passionate about the idea of wanting to shift this northward above Middlefield, and so I think we should take at least a straw vote to see whether there's a majority support for that. If not, then I think it's okay to echo in general comments from, staff, that we discussed this at length, probably at more length than anything else, and that, there were various things suggested that council can consider. So if you're okay with that, how many people would support Mr. Commissioner Cranston's idea of shifting the height exception area north of Middlefield Road? Let's show hands.
She had a comment.
You had another comment, okay.
Before we take the straw vote,
Sure.
I wonder if I could throw out something.
Okay,
I was thinking of the relationship between this, commercial area with the village center. I don't mean to throw in more things, but I'm just wondering if it might be relevant. Because that's another area where we want to get more commercial as well, right, in the village center, am I correct?
Well, the
in that?
village center is required commercial. So there's no incentive for commercial in the village center. You have to do commercial.
Right. So in terms of people who live there, if they're doing a lot of businesses in the village center, and this is about a mile away from it?
I think it's a little less than a mile, maybe half a mile. I don't know exactly, but yeah.
Okay. So just thinking about whether the two can be somehow, drive traffic to each other and encourage more businesses for both, whether there's a creative way of doing that. Sorry for making it more complicated.
Yeah, well, we, certainly part of our urban design goal for Middlefield is to create an interesting, vibrant, active, bicycle-friendly, that's a way to kind of link the spaces sustainably. And we are also creating a number of other links through the precise plan, Paseo links, other kind of walkable links to break up the blocks. So a big part of the precise plan is this idea around creating more connection to the village center and vice versa.
I guess the one thing I would say about the village center is that, versus this location, is that this is actually a central area in the precise plan. And, the village center is kind of off to the side a bit and very close to very low-density residential, so there's a limit on how high you can go there. And so my hope would be that we did have a place like this, more central to precise plan, where the heights could go higher and could provide some of this kind of thing. So, I guess I like the idea that the village center will develop, but I don't believe it can bear the whole burden of what we're trying to do here. So anyway, I think we still need to take a straw vote. So how many people are in favor of Commissioner Cranston's proposal to recommend shifting the height exception area north of Middlefield Road? 2? Okay, well, that answers it then. Okay, so how many people are okay with having council describe in the staff report, the fact that we had an extensive discussion and some of the things that we went over? Okay, so I think that's a yes. Commissioner Capriles.
I was going to suggest perhaps within the height exceptions that we extend the 750 feet to 1,000 and not specify how that's going to be done, and leave the height exceptions the way they're currently read in the precise plan. And that would extend that another 250 feet. And if you want to say specific to the north, I don't care, but it seems like that would kind of capture the direction that you want to go in without it being too specific. Does that make sense?
So
Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, if what I'm hearing is correct, is there's two aspects of shifting to the north, right? There's taking the bottom and moving it up to Middlefield Road, but then also taking the top and moving it up north. And so what you're asking is, what if we leave the bottom where it is, but also move the top up?
Okay.
Does that serve?
What do you think of that?
Would you retain the restriction on edge of the precise plan? So this flat spot here is because it's the edge of the precise plan? Would you retain that restriction? This is a question for Commissioner Capriles.
I don't know.
If I interpret her question correctly, it would just be moving the north part of the border, so it wouldn't affect the boundary from the precise plan.
I'd be fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just trying to reach a
All right.
compromise so we can move along.
So let's try to do a show of hands on that proposal. How many people would support Commissioner Capriles' revised proposal of Commissioner Cranston's proposal to move the height exceptions area another 750 feet?
250.
250 feet, right. 250 feet north, and that would cover the Loge building, right? And some of the adjacent area. Okay, so let's see a show of hands. Okay, we got 5. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Capriles and Commissioner Cranston. Okay, and other people who voted for it too. Okay, so I think we've closed on that then?
Just to clarify then, so is it then both pieces, just when we go to make the actual motion, is it the one that you did the straw vote on of moving it to 250 in addition to the comments to council that the commission had an extensive discussion considering various things?
I'm happy to re-summarize the
Yeah.
comments, just make sure everybody's
Yeah,
on board.
those points, I wasn't even so much to say that those would be in the motion itself, but that they would be included in the council report, that just as, when you talk about what was the feedback from the EPC, or what did EPC talk about? Or maybe, I don't know, is that not how you would do that, or?
Well, I certainly heard a lot of support for more diagrams.
Right.
Right? I mean, I think that can be part of the motion. Exceptional design,
Okay, let me write some of these down.
I think that can be part of the motion. Let's see,
Okay, and obviously the shifting, the expansion.
the expansion to the
Okay.
north.
There's,
And I think I heard from Commissioner Yin the idea of,
Oh, yeah, being
Limiting the
commensurate
amount.
with the neighborhood commercial amount.
okay, in the neighborhood commercial. Can you summarize again, Commissioner Yin, your point on that again, because I want to make sure we say it correctly.
I don't even pretend to know what the proportion should be, but if you do add neighborhood commercial, that it's not the entire project that shoots up,
Oh, okay.
some proportion
Okay.
relative to the
Okay,
amount
the
of commercial.
proportion of height that's given is proportional to the amount of neighborhood commercial that's actually offered. Okay. Okay. So I think we've closed on that item. All right, and then the last thing was Commissioner Lowe had some additional comments that you wanted to make.
So, yeah, I had sent Eric some comments. You all have a printout of that, and I'm looking for my copy. It's the one that has blue text on it.
You want to put a copy out for the public? in
Yeah,
case they
you
wanna
found
look
it?
at
Okay, got it. So, Eric, should I just run through it with everybody, or how can?
Yeah, feel free to
Okay.
introduce, describe however you like.
Okay, so here I have some comments specific to Chapter 4.3, which is on-site open space and landscaping. In section 4.33, title Open Space Location and Context, I would like to add one point, which I titled Connecting Green Spaces, and the text reads, public and private open spaces should be connected by a safe and shaded paseo, is that how you pronounce it? Yes. Multi-use path or greenways to provide easy access to nature for all residents. Such linkages also help form habitat corridors, which are needed to sustain populations of pollinators and other wildlife. And then in section, I probably have the section number wrong here.
4.3.
Yeah, so the first one was 4.31, sorry. So this one is may I?
Sure.
I have an older copy. 4.33, I would propose adding a section that I titled Trees and Native Plants. And the text reads, climate resilient shade trees and native understory plants should be planted along streets, multi-use paths, greenways, and paseos. And then I have suggested some modification to the following sections. In section 4.34, landscaping and sustainability, in addition to the existing text in section 1, large canopy trees, I added the text in blue. So the whole paragraph reads, open spaces should provide large canopy trees in support of the city's community tree master plan. Strong preference should be given to tree species that are adaptable to climate change threats, can foster resilience, build biological diversity, support native wildlife, and are resistant to insect and disease damage. In the section titled Sustainability, I suggested some text here. We remove private from the first sentence, so the sentence reads, new open spaces instead of new private open spaces. And then I added some more content to define building heating and cooling efficiency. I expanded that to read building energy conservation through measures such as trees and green roofs. And then for stormwater management, I added green infrastructure. And for landscaping, I added it should be climate resilient. And then there's a very minor modification to section 4.43 for surface parking design, where bullet number 5, there's basically a typo that we corrected here. So now it reads, when site and building improvements are made, tree canopy and surface parking lots should be increased to at least 50% coverage at maturity. So those are my suggestions, and I would love to hear your feedback and comments.
Commissioner Yin.
Oh, it all sounds very good to me. I just had one quick question. Under sustainability, why take out building, heating, cooling, efficiency? I'm all for what you added. I was just curious why that was removed in your mind.
It's because this is all under the umbrella of open space and landscaping.
I see.
So I'm
Okay.
specifying what we mean by energy saving for building.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question back to staff. So the use of the word should here, does that mean that these are guidelines or requirements?
This is in the guidelines chapter.
Okay, this is guidelines, okay. And did you review this with Commissioner Lowe in advance of the meeting?
Yes.
Okay, and you're largely okay with it?
Yes.
Okay, so then I'm supportive of it as well. Other commissioners?
I think it's great. I think
Okay.
it adds a lot of clarity to what we want,
Sounds,
so I like that. Thank you,
Okay.
Commissioner Lowe.
so I see everybody on the commission favorable toward this change in language. So when we come to do the motion, we will, read this into the motion then, right?
Yep.
Okay. Are there other points on the East Westman Precise Plan that other commissioners wanted to bring up for discussion tonight? Commissioner Yan.
Very, very small thing. Page 117, the graphic for the gallery. For some reason, the gallery still looks like it's forward of the adjacent building setback line and looks like it's sitting in the sidewalk. It just needs to shove back so that it's in line with the adjacent property, and I think that makes it a lot clearer.
Okay, yeah, we can, can we adjust that? We can find another image.
So that one, I don't think we need to put in the motion, right? Okay, all right. Commissioner Cranston.
I guess, and maybe this should have been a question at the beginning. The service streets, are those public streets or they're only within a property owner's property?
So a service street would need to be publicly accessible if it aligns with one of the blocks. The 400-foot block standard that we have in the civic spaces section, and the green lines that we have on the conceptual circulation plan. So if the street aligns with those lines, it would need to be publicly accessible. If a developer is building another service street that doesn't serve those blocks or that minimum connectivity, they have the option to make it publicly accessible or not. In no cases would a service street be a public street in that it wouldn't have public utilities in it, it wouldn't be maintained by the city, it wouldn't have all the same kind of rights and maintenance obligations as like Middlefield or Ellis.
And the language in the precise plan today, I couldn't figure out myself. In those cases where it's not aligned with one of those things, is the aligning with the precise plan a requirement or a guideline?
Aligning what with the precise plan?
So if it's a service street that's not one of those things that you just described, okay? It's another service street that they've chosen to put in. Is the way the precise plan worded, are they required to meet the service street thing in here? Is that a
required to meet the service street standard, like dimensions or?
Standards, yes.
Yes, they would be required to meet the service street standards. Part of that is just in terms of livability and character of the design. They may have the option, depending on the configuration of the site, they may have the option to apply the alley standards if they need vehicle access, but they don't want to use the service street dimensions.
I didn't spend a lot of time looking at the alley standards. I just, it seemed odd to me that that something that was and this is maybe still a terminology thing, a service street that wasn't intended to be, part of the network that we're trying to build out would still be required to meet that standard.
Wouldn't that be for the public safety, the fire trucks and that sort of thing to get through as well? I think it's more than just, service from a, delivery point of view or that sort of thing. I think it's more the, for fire service and safety.
Yeah, that's part of the dimensions, that's part of the standard, but then there's also the setback standard, which is not associated to that. And again, it goes back to this concept of, creating separations between buildings, which is part of the kind of overall character and design of the precise plan, creating livable spaces within the precise, within projects, and other, creating adequate tree canopy, other precise plan goals.
Does it also limit the size of the building itself so that we don't have mega structures? That helps. by having the service streets.
That's right, yeah. It also helps to break up the structures, yeah, break up the blocks.
So I don't, maybe Amelia wanted, I guess I'm willing to sacrifice a tree along a service street to get more open space in other parts of the development. And so I struggled with putting so much landscaping in what I perceived as something that's, yes, it'll be publicly accessible, but if it's a choice between giving more green space in areas that it's a little bit bigger area, then I was just concerned that we're effectively sacrificing what could be green space other places in the development by making the service streets with sidewalks and landscaping and streets that maybe could be used in other areas of the development. So because service streets, yeah, you can walk around it, but it's not where people are going to gather. They're not as activated, programmed, those kind of things. So I just was, that was my concern.
Take a walk back in behind Trader Joe's and see what they haven't done. And that's what we're trying to correct.
I don't know if it helps, but someone once pointed out to me, all of downtown can fit between East Middlefield, Ellis, this Once Upon a Time Street A, and this Once Upon a Time Street C. So if we didn't have those, we could potentially have just project for the entire area of downtown with no break. So I guess, and then maybe Service Street is the name Service Street, you think, garbage trucks, but I think they're aiming for it to be more than that, that it's a way for the public to be able to walk through and have canopy and to add connections throughout the area.
Do you have a specific point that you wanted us to recommend to council, or can we move on?
Oh, as a question for Eric. So a couple folks have pointed out the area behind Trader Joe's and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You know what? That's a reality. Okay, you're going to have a back end of the backside of retail spaces and those kind of things. In my head, a service street is where that truck goes. Okay, I would actually prefer not to have people walking along that, so that the semi coming in is in the middle of it. In the little shopping center near me, the guys who deliver the stuff for Safeway in the morning block off the entire parking lot when they come in to try to drop off stuff. So I would, quite frankly, rather separate some of those things. And again, may just be terminology, but having those service streets and maybe that's the alley standard for those kind of things where there's deliveries, there's that I would not necessarily want them walking through the middle of that, so that it is actually, to me, it would seem safer to isolate those areas rather than having them places where people are wandering around. So maybe you can, am I misinterpreting the intention of these standards for that kind of a thing?
Well, the reality is that on a project-by-project basis, we have to incorporate a lot of interests and a lot of demands. So where the garbage ends up going, we might try to hide that from the main public streetscape. And so then it's going to have to go somewhere that isn't ideal from another perspective. So, there are a lot of conflicting interests, so you can't kind of pre-plan where all needs of a project site are going to be and how they're all necessarily going to be designed. I think service streets, the intention in the precise plan is that service streets and alleys could serve those garbage needs, the emergency access needs, and other kind of incidental needs internal to the site. Part of the goal of the service street standards is to create also a pedestrian-friendly environment, even though there may be garbage trucks coming through. So what I heard you say at the beginning was, can we provide flexibility for service streets that are not designated publicly accessible?
That's what in my mind, it would be better that this is a guideline for those kind of areas as
Right.
opposed to a requirement for those kind of areas.
And I think, that may be a fairly simple question to ask the rest of the commission if they agree or not, or, but I'll leave that up to the chair.
Yeah, I guess I would just throw in the comment, and echo here what Commissioner Capriles said. I mean, I drive past that intersection. I drive through that area behind the Trader Joe's every Saturday, and I mean, I've noticed that at least when I'm there, that intersection between, that goes in back of the Safeway and in back of that parking area that leads down to the Trader Joe's is one of the busiest intersections in Mountain View, and yet it isn't really called out for any presence. And so, I mean, that was something that I wish had been done differently, and I think that, having some guidelines spelled out like this, can help avoid that. I think we can always have council have a specific exception, under their appropriate circumstances. I mean, if I think, for instance, of the street that I live on right now, I mean, it's 20 feet across and it required a variance. And that was a case where it was good to have the variance because there was no way to do that street unless you did it that way. But in general, I'm more inclined toward keeping what you have here, for the kind of reasons that Commissioner Capriles brought up and other things that I've seen. So, I don't know. I mean, do you want us to take a straw poll on whether or not we change this?
My request would be that it becomes a guideline for those streets that are not aligned, not necessarily to meet the connection network that's intended in the precise plan. It's not a requirement for those streets.
Okay, so let's take a straw poll then on whether or not, these, this part of the precise plan should be recategorized as a guideline rather than as what's the right alternate term.
Well, it's expressed as a standard, but there is language, let me see if I can find it. It's easier to flip through this way. Thanks. So this is on page 139. So first it says, the street sections in the remainder of this chapter shall be used for all publicly accessible streets, routes, and paths, except where the city determines otherwise through the development review or CIP process. And then it also says,
So the shall is kind of leading it toward it being a standard then, right?
it is, but I think there are also other kind of engineering and other policy considerations, right? So, except where the city determines otherwise through the development review or CIP process, I think would give the council some flexibility to approve an alternate alignment if there is some greater good that can be demonstrated.
Okay, well, Mr. Cranston, would you like us to take a straw poll?
I'm not hearing any of the support for it, so.
Oh, okay. All right, I think then we'll leave it as a standard. Okay, so is there any other discussion before we entertain a motion? Okay, is there a member of the commission that would like to make the motion? Commissioner Gabrielis.
I would like to move that the EPC provide a resolution recommending the city council certify the East Wisman Precise Plan Final Environmental Impact Report and adopt the CEQA findings, including statement of overriding considerations and mitigation monitoring and reporting program to be read in title only, further reading waived. Exhibit 1 to the staff report. We also would recommend a resolution recommending the city council approve a general plan map and text amendment for the East Wisman mixed-use designation consistent with the East Wisman precise plan to be read in title only, further reading waive, exhibit 2 to the staff report. A resolution recommending the city council approve a zoning map amendment for parcels located in the East Wisman precise plan from ML Limited Industrial, ML-T Limited Industrial with Transit Floating, CN Commercial Neighborhood, CO Commercial Office, R3-2 Residential Multiple Family, and P Planned Community to P-41 East Wisman Precise Plan to be read in title only, further reading waived, Exhibit 3 to the staff report. A resolution recommending the city council adopt the East Wisman Precise Plan to be read in title only, further reading waived, Exhibit 4 to the staff report.
And I wasn't sure if you're going to also read in the additional direction to staff. I can do that if you'd like me to assist.
I think there's a number 5 that I have to read as well.
Which would, the additional direction would be on number?
Correct. The additional direction provided to staff would actually be with respect to number 4.
Okay, with the additional recommendations provided to the staff.
So I'll go ahead and read those in if that's okay. I'll include them as part of the motion, and then you can continue with the rest of it, the 5 through 6.
Please.
Thank you. So for 4, as indicated, resolution recommending City Council adopt the East Wisman Precise Plan to be read in title only, further reading waived, with the following additional direction provided by the Commission. Direction to staff to explore options with incentivizing the LASD TDR projects with the residential mix, alternative housing mix presented by staff with the 3+ bedrooms.
Yeah, the TDR projects are not part of the precise plan.
It's not part of the, it's the linkage, it's on the different.
It's actually just a policy for, it's not part of any of the specific resolutions, because it's a policy to advise council on, or it's to advise council on a policy for reviewing the LASD TDR projects, which doesn't currently have a draft resolution.
You're right. That would have been 6 anyway. I was thinking it was part of the jobs housing, but you're right. So strike that. So then it would be the alternative housing mix presented by staff with the 3 or more bedrooms.
With 2 bedrooms at 30% to 50%, and 3 bedrooms at 10% to 30%.
And with respect to height exceptions, direction to staff for additional or more diagrams, exceptional design standards, expansion of an additional 250 feet for the area north of Middlefield Road, and for neighborhood commercial, making it the height increase proportional relative to the proportion of commercial provided. And all of Commissioner Lowe's proposed modifications as provided. And I believe that is it, unless I failed to include something, Mr. Anderson.
I believe that's in section 4.3.
Yes, they were all modifying 4.3, I think just referencing to the document since it was, it seemed to be general consensus accepting all of them.
And there's also 1 and 5 under sustainability.
Yeah.
But it's
So yeah, they're
also-
all, it's the proposed modifications to chapter 4 presented.
Excellent.
I believe that's it.
I think Commissioner Capriles can continue reading now.
A resolution recommending the city council approve a zoning text amendment to remove the transit T district and transit-oriented development permit from chapter 36 of the city code to be read in title only. Further reading waive exhibit 5 to the staff report. And a resolution recommending the city council approve draft administrative guidelines for the East Wisman Precise Plan Jobs Housing Linkage Program to be read in title only. Further reading waived. Exhibit 6 to the staff report. And do we put any additional recommendations in for the job housing?
Staff will just forward your comments to council for their deliberation on that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Capriles and Nicole. And do I have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Cranston. Okay, so let's call the vote. Eric, did we miss something? You look, okay, okay. You look disturbed. This is a happy time.
It'll come up. Just be persistent. It has a mind of its own. Yeah, I'd try it again.
Technical difficulty here.
I'd vote for you, but I can't vote twice.
I can't get to that screen, sorry.
Okay.
Does it know enough to know when we're done with 2 absent?
We do not yet have a vote from Commissioner Lowe.
She can't pull her screen. She can't pull her screen up.
You can,
I've been doing it.
you can do a roll call vote.
Okay, I'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Capriles,
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Yin,
Yes.
Commissioner Cranston.
Yes.
And I also vote yes, so the resolution passes 5-0 with 2 commissioners absent. Okay, so that closes item 5.1. Thank you, everyone, for a long and productive discussion on that. And now let's move on to item number 2, request for minor zoning text amendments to Chapter 36, zoning ordinance of the City Code of the R4 multifamily standard handout. Oh, I think there's a request to take a short break. How about if we come back? Oh,
I'm going to
Commissioner
miss
Mann?
Hawaii.
okay. Okay. How about if we come back at, what do you think, 10:20? Is that okay?
Have a good evening,
Okay.
Eric.
We'll resume in 10:20. All right, it's time. So let's continue with item 5.2, request for minor zoning text amendments to Chapter 36, zoning ordinance of the City Code and the R4 multifamily standards handout. But as Nicole pointed out to me, because it is after 10 o'clock, we need to take a vote on whether we will continue. So how many people are willing to continue? Put your hands up. All right, it looks like we're willing to continue. Okay. So let's go on. I believe there's a staff report.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Erin Horan, Assistant Planner, and I will be presenting the minor code amendments item here along with Lindsay Hagan, our Deputy Zoning Administrator. And to give you some background, staff periodically reviews the Chapter 36 zoning ordinance for any updates that are necessary due to recent city code updates and state and federal legislation, as well as to increase clarity and consistency within the zoning ordinance. Recently, the City Council adopted the short-term rental ordinance on November 13th, 2018, and created Chapter 44. So staff is proposing to add a section in the zoning ordinance to state this is a permitted use and with no zoning permit required, and refer to the Chapter 44 for specific regulation requirements. Staff's also proposing to add the definition of short-term rentals that is also in Chapter 44 into the definitions of the zoning ordinance. For communication facilities, in September of 2018, the FCC passed a declaratory ruling restricting cities' regulatory authority of wireless facilities in the right-of-way and on or public property, as well as reducing the time frame for review, fees, and discretionary aesthetic criteria, which effectively makes this process a ministerial review. Staff proposes to remove in 3 sections of the code the words including, to add excluding in the public rights-of-way for zoning permit review of wireless facilities, and continue the review strictly with the Public Works Department with an excavation permit, which will still require review by the Building and Planning Department. Recently, Council approved an increase of density in the R4 district to 80 dwelling units per acre in April of 2019 with the Flower Mart project at 555 East Evelyn. So staff is proposing to amend the R4 multifamily standards handout to also reflect that increased allowed density of 80 dwelling units per acre. EV charging stations were passed with AB 1236, a streamlining law that requires cities to expedite permitting of EV charging stations. So staff is proposing adding a section to clarify this exemption from a zoning permit and refer to Chapter 8 for building permit requirements. And currently, it is not clear how EV charging stations and ADA parking spaces are counted in the total required parking spaces. So staff is proposing to clarify that and add language that states that the total required parking spaces is inclusive of EV charging stations and ADA parking spaces. Staff's also proposing to amend this figure of the parking stall striping graphic. The parking stripes, as you see, are noted to be 18 inches from outside edge to outside edge, and the stripes are supposed to be 4-inch stripes each. The interior dimension was showing 12 inches, and if you do the math there, the 4 and 4 and 12 do not equal 18. So we would amend the dimension there to show 10 inches so that it will equal the appropriate 18 inches. Staff is proposing to include a height exception for roof screens, specifically because currently it is pointed out in the height limit section that parapet walls can extend 4 feet above the maximum building height. And a parapet wall is a low wall that is part of the exterior wall of a building and can be used to screen equipment or add an architectural detail. Roof screens are usually more interior to the rooftop and are used to screen larger utility equipment. As you'll see in the diagrams, the top showing the parapet wall and the lower image showing what a roof screen would look like. So staff is proposing to include a specific section that calls out that rooftop screens could extend above the maximum building height to be the least amount necessary to fully screen equipment, but put a maximum up to 10 feet. And this is a demonstration to show what that has looked like. This is an office project on Terabella and North Shoreline, 1001 North Shoreline, that you can see the detail on the right that's showing the building height was up to 65 feet and an additional 8 feet of a roof screen was added there to screen the HVAC equipment, and there was a telecommunication facility that was screened inside there as well. Today, mechanical equipment such as AC units are not explicitly identified in accessory structure setback requirements, and historically staff has applied the same standard that is mentioned for pool equipment that are allowed 3 feet away from any property line. So staff is proposing to add a section to specify that mechanical equipment such as an AC unit to be allowed only in the side or rear setback 3 feet from the property line, not allowed in the front yard or visible from the public street, and can be allowed in the street side yard setback within a fenced yard. So the diagram here illustrates where you could potentially see something like an AC unit. If you see this lot in the back where the black squares are, there's a 3 foot minimum from the side, 3 foot minimum from the rear, and it's on the street side yard within the fenced yard, which fences on a street side yard have to be minimum 5 feet from the property line. Staff is including this additional text that we had to modify that is not shown in the draft ordinance. The section for the mechanical equipment text we'd like to add, it should read the side or rear yard setback. So we're including this language to add to the draft ordinance. For office definitions, currently there are multiple subcategories that are not all located under the office category definition section. So for instance, the administrative office definition is located under A, and staff is proposing to remove that and consolidate it with the other office definitions under O. Staff's also proposing to amend the industrial land use table, where under office there's a subcategory of financial, which doesn't align with a specific financial definition. The definition that is found is under banks and financial services. So staff is proposing to remove the financial subcategory and include the banks and financial category instead with the same permit requirements, and that would align as well with what you see under the commercial land use table. Staff's also proposing to add a subcategory of office under the office category to show that general office use is allowed, because currently that's not made very clear. It would be following the same alignment as well as what you see in the commercial land use table. And lastly, under sign regulations, the MM, and PF districts have duplicate information for the building mounted and freestanding monument signs. So staff is proposing to remove the duplicate information for added clarity of the requirements. And in conclusion, staff is recommending that the EPC adopt a resolution recommending that the City Council approve minor zoning text amendments to Chapter 36 of the City Code for improved clarity and consistency, with legislative updates to be read in title only, further reading waived Exhibit 1 of the staff report, with the modification presented by staff on October 2nd, 2019, revising Section 361255H for the mechanical equipment, and a resolution recommending the City Council approve text amendments to the R4 multifamily standards to be read in title only, further reading waived, Exhibit 2 of the staff report. And that ends staff's presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone well, first let me just say that I did have a phone call with Lindsay and other staff members before the hearing tonight and had asked for a clarifying, illustration of the rooftop screening. And I want to thank you for showing that to me. That's alleviated any concerns I have on that area. So I'll just open it up to other commissioners as to whether they have particular areas of concern that they would like to discuss on these minor code amendments.
Just a question. So the parapet is 4 feet, but the screens are 10? Why the difference?
So currently the code allows for a 4-foot parapet, but not all buildings are suited to have parapet walls, nor does it make sense for all equipment type. So by adding this language, we're trying to add clarity that it's an option to have a roof screen. We capped it at 10 feet just to have a cap, and it makes sense for the type of telecom facilities that we see proposed on rooftops of commercial buildings. They tend to need the extra length to have the antennas, for example.
Yeah, so I wasn't necessarily questioning the need for it. It was the difference between 4 foot and 10 foot. Why 10 foot internally, but only 4 foot at the edge? Is it just because it's...
Part of it is the visual, yeah, part of it is the visual, even though a roof screen may be proposed at 10 feet from the street or from the sidewalk perspective, it wouldn't read as 10 feet since it's interior to the footprint of the building. Yeah, it's kind of a sightline thing from the sidewalk if you were an average person looking up.
Any other questions from the commission? Seeing none, would someone like to make a motion for a resolution? Oh, sorry. You're right. Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this item? Seeing no comment, we'll bring this back to the commission, and I'll ask if someone would like to make a resolution.
Margaret read the first one.
Okay. Okay, it looks like Commissioner Cranston would like to do that, but we need to see the text. Okay, and do we have a second? Well, yeah, you read this first, and then we take the second, okay.
So I move that the
You gotta
Planning Commission.
turn this on.
I move that the Environment Planning Commission adopt a resolution recommending that City Council approve minor zoning text amendments to Chapter 36, zoning ordinance of the City Code for improved clarity and consistency with legislative updates to be read in title only. Further reading waived, Exhibit 1 of the staff report with the modification presented by staff on October 2, 2019, revising Section 361255H of mechanical equipment, and a resolution recommending the City Council approve text amendments to the R4 multifamily standards to be read in title only, further reading waived, Exhibit 2 of the staff report.
Okay, and seconded by Commissioner Capriles. Okay, let's take the vote. Well, I mean, do we want to do this just by a show of hands? Because we've had problems with the equipment before. I'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Capriles? Yes. Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Yin?
Yes.
Commissioner Cranston?
Yes.
And I also vote yes, so it passes 5-0 with 2 commissioners absent. Okay, so I'll close item 5.2, and then let's move on to item 6, commission staff announcements, updates, requests, and committee reports. Are there reports from staff?
So I just wanted to remind the commission that October 12th, we've set up the site visit to Hercules. And so there will be a follow-up email with more details about where to meet and all that stuff from our office. And then just upcoming meetings, October 16th is a study session meeting where we will be talking about the Gateway Master Plan project in North Bayshore, and also 400 Logue, which is one of the proposed projects in East Wisman, precise plan area. And then October 23rd, there will be one study session item where we will introduce and talk about SB 743, the vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. discussion, and then we will have a public hearing as well that night for the Terabella Visioning Plan. So we will be seeking a recommendation from EPC on that. And just that, I think we've sent out a survey for the holiday party. So just making sure you guys respond to that so we can coordinate that accordingly. Other than that, that concludes staff's announcements.
And don't forget, October 28th is the celebration of service. So if you haven't sent your response back to Wanda Wong, make sure you do that. And celebration of service is the annual commissioners' dinner.
It's different than the Christmas party?
Yes, it's different from the Christmas party. This is all the commissioners from all the advisory bodies. We'll meet together for celebrating the hard work we've done on behalf of our city and eat a buffet dinner. At this time, it's at the Rangsdorf Community Center rather than Michael's at Shoreline. So, okay, and do other commissioners, do the commissioners, does any other commissioner have an update that they would like to give on something they've attended? Commissioner Lowe.
I attended a couple of neighborhood association gathering. One was the Shoreline West Swan neighborhood, and the second one is the Cooper Park Neighborhood Association. They both happened last weekend.
And I'll mention that in my other role as Vice President of the Historical Association here in Mountain View, we held our second annual Heritage Harvest Festival at Heritage Park on last Saturday, and it was well attended, and many thanks to the city staff members that helped us put all of that together. And I also need to remember, but I forgot it tonight, that two of the commissioners were given copies of our history of Mountain View that I didn't bring tonight, but everybody else got one. So Commissioner Capriles and Commissioner Yen, make sure that you get those for me. So, and that's it, I think, then for item number 6. And so we'll move to item number 7, which is adjournment at 10:38 p.m. Okay, thank you all.